Chapter 151, Anaerobic Survival Experiment. As time passed, the number of intelligent entities within the swarm network grew. Under Luo Wen's deliberate selection, most of them were scientists. Some were given new identities and returned to the Imperial Space Research Institute, continuing their previous projects. Others joined Starlight Enterprises, heading private laboratories under its banner. One day, in a Starlight Enterprises laboratory specializing in extraterrestrial environments, a new experiment began. The ratfolk currently lacked any means to explore outer space and thus had no knowledge of its conditions. However, Luo Wen, being educated, knew the basics: low temperatures, lack of oxygen, microgravity, and pervasive cosmic radiation. These experiments, being difficult to justify officially, couldn't gain approval in the ratfolk's official Space Research Institute. As a result, they were relegated to private labs funded and staffed by Luo Wen's recruits. Thanks to unlimited resources and funding, this lab had made notable progress. They developed devices capable of simulating vacuum environments and generating various forms of space radiation. Space radiation, a dangerous mix of gamma rays, high-energy protons, and cosmic rays, was exceedingly harmful to living organisms. The lab publicly claimed its research aimed to develop protective suits that could provide oxygen and shield wearers from radiation. This explanation served as a cover story, as Starlight Enterprises, which conducted mineral explorations, needed such suits to enable workers to delve deeper underground and endure radiation emitted by certain ores. For Luo Wen, exterminating the ratfolk was a simple option, but leveraging their intelligence to develop technology was far more valuable. As such, he preferred deception when possible. On this particular day, the lab received a rare 30-centimeter-long arthropod. Allegedly caught by a fishing vessel, this marine creature could swim yet had wings. Though beetle-like in appearance, it also possessed pincers and 8 spider-like legs. Its exoskeleton, made of a unique material, could withstand immense deep-sea pressure. This previously unknown organism was acquired through the lab owner's extensive connections. With researchers specializing in biological materials, the lab routinely studied various organisms to observe their behavior under space radiation, hoping to find nature-derived solutions to counteract such conditions. When the researchers saw this beetle, they were awestruck. Its appearance defied conventional understanding. While dissection could yield significant discoveries, or at least a few research papers, the specimen was too valuable to destroy. Starlight Enterprises had gone to great lengths to procure it specifically for extreme environment testing. Luo Wen found the situation frustrating. He couldn't risk revealing his true form as a test subject for research. Yet, his progress through other avenues had been slow. Achieving space travel in the short term seemed unlikely, and the most viable solution appeared to be manufacturing spacecraft through the ratfolk's ingenuity. But Luo Wen wasn't planning a leisurely trip to space. He needed to survive in the harsh conditions of outer space for extended periods. Space's extreme environment made rushing in unprepared a recipe for failure. Over the years, he had accumulated countless genetic fragments, but these were all derived from Earth-like conditions. Whether they would remain functional in space was uncertain. Therefore, he required a simulated space environment to test and evolve his genes under vacuum, radiation, and anaerobic conditions. This research base included a small number of insiders loyal to Luo Wen. It wasn't that he didn't want an entirely loyal team, but the swarm network's ability to recruit intelligent individuals had been discovered too recently. The network still lacked the numbers needed for a fully in-house lab. Luo Wen couldn't afford to wait decades for this ideal. Simulating and evolving new abilities in such an environment wasn't a quick process, and waiting for a fully loyal lab might take a century. He wasn't willing to accept such delays. Instead, he prioritized reducing the timeline. Although the lab's reliance on outsiders compromised security, Luo Wen wasn't irreplaceable, provided the brood nest was safeguarded. Moreover, the researchers were tightly monitored to prevent leaks. Without their knowledge, parasitic organisms had also infiltrated their bodies. These parasites, derived from iron wireworms found in mantises, could release special chemicals into their host's nervous system when necessary. These chemicals disrupted protein synthesis, mimicked neural signals, and sent erroneous commands to the host's body. If someone attempted to divulge secrets, their vocal system would fail, rendering them mute. Persistent attempts could trigger uncontrollable self-destructive behavior. In this way, these researchers could be considered half-loyal to Luo Wen. The test chamber was soon prepared. Luo Wen wasted no time stepping into the enclosed space. The chamber, a sealed environment spanning a few square meters, had 99% of its air evacuated. Luo Wen's first challenge was to adapt to surviving without oxygen. The initial test results exceeded his expectations. After merely sleeping in the chamber, his body underwent subtle yet significant internal changes. The fiber-like structures in his body, originally developed after being disemboweled by the yellow earth ants to rapidly seal wounds, evolved further into a valve-like structure. These valves partitioned his body into isolated compartments. Normally functioning like sieves, they didn't impede bodily systems. In emergencies, they could seal all external openings, transforming his body into a completely sealed environment. Additionally, the energy stored in his tail-lard organ could sustain his body for extended periods. This energy cycled within his body with minimal waste, producing only trace amounts of gas. These gases could be funneled into isolated chambers within his body for eventual release. Remarkably, these chambers could form anywhere in his body using the valve structures. By releasing gases, they could even provide propulsion for directional changes during flight. With modifications to key muscle groups, such as enhancing powerful sphincters, these gases could accelerate flight. While current speed limits remained low, the absence of atmospheric drag in space promised greater efficiency. Having solved the issues of bodily insulation and internal circulation, Luo Wen now needed to address energy acquisition. With this, he could survive in anaerobic environments for extended periods. However, outer space presented more than just a lack of oxygen. And oxygen deficiency was the easiest problem to solve. Chapter 152, Experiments Underway, 1. Despite starting strong, Luo Wen's subsequent experiments didn't go as smoothly. His next challenge was testing his survival in cold environments. Luo Wen's body already possessed genes for cold resistance, allowing him to endure ordinary frigid conditions with ease. However, the extreme cold of outer space was an entirely different matter. Luo Wen vaguely recalled space temperatures being around -200 degrees Celsius, but the exact figure escaped him. The ratfolk's industrial limitations meant their laboratory could simulate temperatures only down to about -150 degrees Celsius. Even at this threshold, Luo Wen faced a significant setback. Shortly after entering the simulated environment, his body began losing heat rapidly. Frost formed on his surface, and his bodily fluids started to freeze. At this point, his emergency systems activated, putting him into hibernation mode. His metabolism slowed drastically, nearly halting fluid flow and paralyzing his body. Had Luo Wen not already been a networked being, his consciousness would likely have been forcibly shut down into a dormant state, leaving his body to slowly succumb to the cold's ravages. However, hibernation couldn't halt the damage caused by extreme cold. Within 5 minutes, his body began deteriorating at the cellular level. In the past, such circumstances would have meant death, his consciousness fading painlessly in slumber. Now, he was able to alert the insiders monitoring the experiment to halt the test and extract his body. Afterward, his body cocooned itself for 3 days to repair the damage. This remarkable recovery left the semi-insiders astonished. During this recovery period, Luo Wen reflected deeply. He realized his overconfidence, inflated by the success of the anaerobic experiment. Even with his exceptional talents, evolution required time. Plunging into an environment beyond his limits meant his body would collapse before his abilities could manifest. In simpler terms, he had overstepped his bounds. Taking this lesson to heart, the second experiment was conducted with the chamber temperature set between -50 and -60 degrees Celsius. After filling his tail-lard organ with energy reserves, Luo Wen entered the chamber. The lowest temperature he had previously endured in nature was around -20 to -30 degrees. Dropping an additional 30 degrees was uncomfortable but bearable. His internal hibernation gene attempted to force him offline. As his limbs gradually numbed, Luo Wen didn't resist, allowing himself to enter hibernation. His body cocooned itself, while his consciousness returned to the swarm network. 2 days later, his body emerged from the cocoon. In the third experiment, Luo Wen's hibernation system no longer triggered warnings upon entering the chamber. This time, several genes fused during his hibernation. Though their exact origins were unclear given the sheer number of samples he had accumulated over the years. The resulting fusion prompted his body to secrete an oily substance. This substance mixed with his bodily fluids, lowering their freezing point. As secretion continued, its concentration in his fluids increased, further reducing their freezing point. Previously, in similar conditions, his bodily fluids had begun to crystallize. But now, thanks to the oily substance, this did not occur. His fluids continued to flow normally, maintaining his bodily functions. In subsequent tests, the chamber's temperature was gradually lowered while the oily substance concentration increased. However, at -100 degrees Celsius, the substance's effectiveness waned, and crystallization began. As the temperature dropped further, Luo Wen's hibernation system reactivated, forcing him offline. His body entered hibernation but failed to cocoon itself. At this point, his genetic repository lacked anything capable of countering such extreme cold. Yet, as the temperature continued to plummet, his body avoided destruction. Instead, his innate talents initiated the evolution of his hibernation ability. His cells began shrinking, expelling non-essential materials outside their walls. The expelled material crystallized outside the cells, forming a protective layer. When the chamber reached the ratfolk's technological limit, Luo Wen's cells had expelled 90% of their contents, retaining only their core components. The external crystallization also provided some protection. At this point, Luo Wen's consciousness forcibly returned to his body. However, with his fluids completely frozen and circulation halted, he couldn't move. He signaled the laboratory to cease energy input, allowing the chamber temperature to gradually rise. As the crystals outside his cells melted, they were reabsorbed, and his cells began to regain activity. When the temperature reached -100 degrees Celsius, the oily substance resumed secretion, restoring fluid circulation and returning his body to normal. Afterward, Luo Wen confirmed that his body hadn't sustained any damage from this test. Yet, he found little cause for celebration. Beyond -100 degrees, he lost all mobility. He wasn't venturing into space to sleep. This outcome fell far short of his requirements. Moreover, the oily substance had reached its evolutionary limits, offering no further potential. Luo Wen needed to explore alternative methods to combat extreme cold. For now, there was no need to stubbornly pursue this avenue. While the ratfolk worked on upgrading the chamber's capabilities, Luo Wen would dispatch numerous bugs to the planet's poles in search of rare organisms capable of surviving and functioning in ultra-low temperatures. After a few days of rest, Luo Wen began his experiments with space radiation adaptation. While the experiments simulated space radiation, Luo Wen lacked precise knowledge of the specific types of radiation in space. The ratfolk hadn't yet sent spacecraft beyond the atmosphere, leaving them unable to measure such conditions. As a result, the radiation used in these tests primarily came from mineral samples or byproducts of other experiments. Although not identical to space radiation, they served as a starting point for finding countermeasures. In reality, any object in nature with a temperature above absolute zero emits radiation in the form of electromagnetic waves and particles. Luo Wen's concern was with harmful radiation levels exceeding safety thresholds, which could cause decay in his body, damage his nervous system, and harm other organ systems. In the first test, after 1 hour of exposure to harmful radiation, Luo Wen's body began cocooning. However, this cocoon offered little protection against radiation penetration. As time passed, the cocoon's internal temperature rose under continued radiation exposure. After 20 hours, irreversible cellular damage began to occur. Chapter 153, Experiments Underway, 2. In the past, Luo Wen would never have dared to conduct such risky experiments. However, his brood nest body had become more like a tool, a uniquely irreplaceable tool, but one that could serve as an ideal experimental subject. Over the years, as a swarm network entity, Luo Wen had mostly operated by projecting his consciousness into temporary hosts among the network's nodes. His original body often remained hidden deep under the ocean, rarely utilized. This shift in perspective had profoundly changed Luo Wen's mindset. He now saw himself as a mecha pilot, with the nodes, including his original body, acting as his mechas. Depending on the situation, he could switch between various mechas such as insects, birds, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, beasts, or even ratfolk, all tailored from genetic templates. If a mecha broke down, he could simply replace it. The brood nest, while special, was just another mecha. Of course, he still prioritized the protection of his brood nest and his original body, as they represented the swarm's ultimate potential and could not be destroyed simultaneously. But sacrificing one occasionally was acceptable. As it was now, prolonged exposure to high-intensity radiation provided Luo Wen with valuable data, but it caused irreparable damage to his original body. Under the mournful gazes of the semi-insiders, the body was incinerated. A month later, an identical creature was delivered to the lab. The semi-insiders were baffled. Wasn't this specimen supposed to be extremely rare? Radiation protection experiments involved a wide variety of radiation sources, making them a lengthy endeavor. Luo Wen understood this and focused on ensuring progress wasn't hindered by human factors. Beyond that, he could only wait. Meanwhile, the Imperial Space Research Institute saw significant developments. With the strong support of the Kerrigan Empress, the institute expanded rapidly, influencing many young scholars' career choices. Within 5 years, its staff grew to over 20 times its initial size. It had originally been established by integrating experts from the Kingdom of Kerrigan and the Kingdom of Merican, with nearly 20,000 personnel at its inception. The collaboration of so many brilliant minds accelerated progress on the lunar exploration project. The Ratfolk had been developing aerospace technology for years, but concepts alone weren't enough. Under Luo Wen's guidance, though he was no academic, their technological priorities were severely misaligned. Lacking a robust industrial foundation and a complete system, building a lunar rocket was a pipe dream. In previous years, the Ratfolk had launched numerous prototype rockets, all of which failed. To Luo Wen, some didn't even outperform firecrackers. Still, failure is the mother of success. Through repeated setbacks, the Ratfolk gained valuable experience and refined their designs to resemble rockets from Luo Wen's memories. However, they eventually hit a wall. Theoretical blueprints could no longer be realized. Supersonic flight demanded strong, pressure-resistant, heat-tolerant, and lightweight materials, which the Ratfolk's material sciences couldn't provide. Increasingly precise rocket engines exceeded the capabilities of Ratfolk machinery. The refinement of rocket fuels, oxidizers, and accelerants was beyond their technological reach. Many associated technologies faced similar challenges. Without external intervention, the project might have been abandoned due to its immense cost. But the Kerrigan Empress, being a networked being, proposed a groundbreaking solution, consolidating all related fields under the Research Institute's jurisdiction. This bold move shocked many. The Space Institute already consumed a significant portion of the Empire's budget with minimal results. Mostly launching overpriced fireworks for public entertainment. Jealous of its funding, critics had repeatedly called for its dissolution, only to be overruled by the Empress. As the founding monarch, her authority was unparalleled, leaving dissenters little recourse. The Empress's latest expansion plans sparked a wave of rumors and slander. Some claimed she was infatuated with a handsome researcher, others questioned her sanity. There were even whispers of the American kingdom's remnants attempting to exploit the situation to restore their monarchy. People quickly forgot how Kerrigan had unified the empire. Or perhaps the enormous stakes encouraged selective amnesia. Fortunately, Luo Wen was a helpful bug. Those spreading the wildest rumors, whether overtly or covertly, began dying in their sleep. Luo Wen's intervention rekindled memories of the fear once instilled by unfortunate accidents. The rumors swiftly disappeared, restoring peace and harmony to the empire. Ordinary citizens, bewildered by the rapid turn of events, could only marvel at how quickly the tide shifted. The Institute's expansion proposal passed with unprecedented speed, facing no further resistance. Many of the tens of thousands of personnel now in the Institute came from fields merged during this restructuring. As supporting systems improved, a prototype rocket based on conceptual blueprints was finally constructed 5 years later. Around the same time, Luo Wen resumed adaptation experiments in Starlight Enterprises' private lab. Once assembled and inspected, the new rocket underwent its first launch test 2 months later. Unfortunately, shortly after liftoff, it exploded into a spectacular firework, witnessed by officials and citizens across a 100-kilometer radius. While the test failed, it revealed numerous issues. 6 months later, a new rocket was built. The new rocket measured 15 meters tall and weighed 13.5 tons. Its nose cone housed gyroscopes, an inertial navigation computer, and a radio command receiver. The middle section contained fuel and oxidizer tanks, using a combination of alcohol fuel and liquid oxygen oxidizer. The tail housed the engine and fins. The system worked by pumping fuel and oxidizer through separate pipelines into the engine's combustion chamber, where they mixed, ignited, and burned. The high-temperature, high-pressure gases expelled from the bottom generated thrust. When Luo Wen examined the system and blueprints, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. Chapter 154, Experiments Underway, 3. Upon seeing the rocket's design blueprints, Luo Wen inexplicably thought of the Gatling system. Both designs involved two chambers working in tandem with a reaction chamber. However, Luo Wen couldn't yet find genetic organs capable of producing the necessary fuel and oxidizers, nor could biological structures achieve the strength required for a rocket combustion chamber. Otherwise, Luo Wen might have been able to create a biological rocket based on this theoretical framework and the blueprints. The rocket's direction was adjusted not only by movable air rudders on its 4 tail fins but also by 4 gas rudders installed within the nozzle, which directed the rocket's exhaust flames. After ignition, the rocket flew smoothly and ascended to an altitude of 500,000 meters before running out of fuel and falling back to the ground. This marked the first time that the Rat Folk's flying machine had reached such heights. Previous prototypes had struggled to even cross the 10,000-meter mark. The sudden leap in altitude represented a significant breakthrough and greatly excited the Rat Folk. Empress Kerrigan declared a 2-day national holiday to celebrate the achievement. The launch also provided a wealth of data. The Rat Folk devised multiple improvement plans based on the shortcomings identified during the launch. The dramatic advancement of the new rocket had a significant impact on the Kerrigan Empire. For the first time, the Rat Folk saw the possibility of success. Empress Kerrigan capitalized on this momentum by increasing funding to the Imperial Space Research Institute. The researchers at the institute were the most motivated by this success. With unlimited resources and full departmental cooperation, they managed to create an improved rocket within just 1 year. The main navigation and propulsion systems of the new rocket had shown no issues in the previous test. The failure was due to running out of fuel, so the new prototype focused on addressing this problem. The new rocket retained its streamlined design, narrow at the top and wider at the base, but was significantly larger, 34 meters tall with a diameter of 3 meters. Additionally, 4 booster rockets, each 19 meters long, were strapped to the lower half of the main body, making the new rocket resemble the previous generation encircling a new central core. This unique configuration brought the total weight to an astounding 280 tons. The fuel was also upgraded, switching from alcohol to kerosene. The sheer size of the new rocket made it visually imposing even when stationary. However, the larger size and the inclusion of 5 propulsion systems meant that the fueling and oxidizer loading processes were time-consuming and complex. On the launch day of the new rocket, thousands of Rat Folk gathered outside the 3-kilometer exclusion zone to witness the event. Excitement gave way to fatigue and hunger as the lengthy preparations dragged on. Finally, the launch was ready. Empress Kerrigan personally gave the launch order. Flames erupted from the rocket's base, accompanied by billowing smoke that quickly obscured the rocket. In moments, the rocket pierced through the smoke and soared skyward. The Rat Folk watched as the rocket, trailing a fiery plume, shrank into a distant speck before vanishing entirely. The crowd stared skyward for a while longer before erupting into deafening cheers. The 4 boosters propelled the massive rocket to an altitude of 1,500 kilometers, successfully breaching the atmosphere before detaching. The primary stage's thruster was remotely ignited, and the rocket's navigation system recalibrated its trajectory. With renewed propulsion, the rocket continued toward the moon. Having escaped the atmosphere, the rocket faced significantly less air resistance. With only one engine left, it traveled nearly 100,000 kilometers before losing power. Captured by planetary gravity, it became an orbiting satellite. The launch plunged the rat folk into a frenzy of celebration. Luo Wen, too, was thrilled. Although the rocket was still far from reaching the moon, breaking through the atmosphere was a critical milestone. The remaining challenges of expanding the fuel capacity and increasing thrust were far easier to tackle than the initial development of a rocket. Meanwhile, Luo Wen's experiments had also made progress. First, his optical stealth system was functional. Its principle relied on nanometer-scale crystalline structures in his skin, forming specialized pigment cells. By controlling the spacing between the crystalline structures, these cells reflected different wavelengths of light. Over the years, Luo Wen had gained full control over this ability. Since many forms of radiation were transmitted via light, Luo Wen's eyes, which could perceive a broader spectrum than human eyes, clearly detected wavelengths invisible to others. Through continuous experimentation and observation, Luo Wen identified several wavelengths harmful to his body and adjusted his crystalline structures to reflect them. As for the remaining types of radiation, Luo Wen had no immediate solution and could only endure them by thickening the keratin layers on his outer body. His experiments on cold resistance, however, were at a standstill. While he could survive extreme cold by stalling his biological functions, this method lacked practicality. Yet, breakthroughs often came unexpectedly. After the new rocket breached outer space, several more launch tests followed. Though they didn't achieve further breakthroughs in flight distance, they successfully sent satellites and observation devices into space. Data from these devices revealed that outer space was cold, oxygen-deprived, and filled with various types of radiation. Without solutions to these challenges, the rat folk couldn't venture beyond their planet. Luo Wen realized early on that with relevant theoretical knowledge, he could conduct more effective experiments. For instance, with the theory behind rocket fuel and oxidizer systems, Luo Wen only needed to address a few key issues to develop a biological rocket. This approach was far more efficient and reliable than blindly relying on innate talent. In terms of time, evolving abilities for lunar travel through pure imagination would take an unmeasurable amount of time. But with theoretical knowledge and targeted evolution to address critical issues, Luo Wen estimated it might take only a century. Had he possessed this knowledge earlier, there would have been no need to cultivate the rat folk civilization. However, a mature rat folk civilization now proved invaluable. Not only did they continuously convert more members into the swarm, but they also provided Luo Wen with theoretical insights, serving as highly effective tools. The discovery of space radiation spurred numerous research efforts, with many experimental results and papers published. One paper, in particular, inspired Luo Wen greatly. Chapter 155, Experiments Underway, 4. Compared to cosmic radiation, the radiation Luo Wen dealt with in the laboratory was child's play. According to calculations, unless he thickened his keratin layer to over 3 meters, he would be unable to withstand such radiation. A 3-meter thick keratin shell would require his body size to reach at least 20 meters to support the armor, and the weight would likely exceed 100 tons. Given the rat folk's current level of technology, even another century might not suffice to send him to the moon. Thus, the idea of enduring radiation physically was no longer feasible. The paper Luo Wen read discussed the hypothesis of planetary magnetic fields shielding against cosmic radiation. The author speculated that planets naturally generated a massive protective field, deflecting or neutralizing harmful radiation from space, as evidenced by the ability of life to thrive on planetary surfaces. The paper concluded with a proposal to research this field and replicate it in a small-scale magnetic device, which could be installed on rockets or personal protective suits to counter space radiation. Through the swarm network, Luo Wen quickly tracked down the author, who turned out to be working in a private laboratory under Starlight Enterprises. Unbeknownst to this rat folk, they were suddenly entrusted with a critical mission, promoted to lead a new laboratory, granted unlimited funding and personnel, and tasked with a single goal: developing the magnetic device envisioned in the paper as quickly as possible. Luo Wen's genetic library contained numerous organisms with unique understandings of magnetic fields, but none offered a complete framework. Even his anti-gravity wings, Beetle Elytra, were merely a rudimentary application of magnetic fields. Thus, Luo Wen needed a comprehensive theory to integrate and enhance these capabilities. Developing a magnetic organ was far more feasible than enduring cosmic radiation directly. Time flew by, and in just a few years, the Rat Folk's aerospace industry made remarkable strides. Rockets underwent continuous propulsion system upgrades, bringing them closer to reaching the moon. 2 years ago, they even managed to send a 4-clawed beast into space. Unfortunately, their rockets still lacked re-entry systems. The creature contributed a wealth of data before becoming a permanent fixture in planetary orbit. Last year, a Rat Folk was sent into low Earth orbit and successfully returned. Although they suffered numerous ailments afterward, they survived. Luo Wen was intrigued but frustrated. After studying the equipment used by the astronaut, he found little of immediate value. For instance, the Rat Folk's protective suit had multiple layers, including a vacuum layer to mitigate extreme temperatures in space. However, Luo Wen had no idea how to grow a vacuum layer within his body. There was good news, though. The radiation protection technology used in the Rat Folk's spacesuits originated from a private laboratory under Starlight Enterprises. The researcher, a Rat Folk named Karen, did not disappoint. They successfully developed a compact magnetic field protection device, which was further refined with ample resources and support. Eventually, the technology was streamlined into a metallic fiber material. The outermost layer of the Rat Folk's spacesuits was composed of this material. By forming a closed loop, it generated an induced current that produced a counter-electromagnetic field to block radiation. Luo Wen couldn't coat his body with such material, but he could use the theory to evolve an organ or ability with similar functionality. After a period of research and experimentation, he was nearing success. First, Luo Wen utilized genes from an electric fish species, whose specialized muscle tissue formed a natural electric organ. These fish also had numerous energy storage cells functioning like miniature stacked batteries. When the nerve center acting as a discharge hub sent signals, the electric organ released electricity, connecting the energy storage cells in series to generate high voltage. This structure could power a small magnetic field generator. To construct the generator, Luo Wen turned to the genes of a metal snail species that lived at depths of 3,000 meters, near hydrothermal vents and undersea volcanoes. Luo Wen had discovered these snails during a deep-sea exploration. While they didn't taste particularly good, their genes were worth collecting. The snails had metallic scales on their footpads and metal shells with natural magnetic properties, giving them a futuristic appearance. Using this trait, Luo Wen incorporated metal particles into his shell, arranging them into a biological magnetic field generator. The electric organ provided energy, successfully creating a small magnetic field on his body's surface. Not only did this magnetic field effectively block radiation penetration, but it also provided an unexpected bonus. The magnetic field's containment effect significantly reduced heat dissipation, stabilizing Luo Wen's ambient temperature. This serendipitously solved the problem of extreme cold in space, a long-standing concern for Luo Wen. Though unsure of the exact mechanism behind this result, Luo Wen chalked it up to an evolutionary anomaly. There was, however, a drawback. The system required a substantial intake of minerals to function. To make it viable for the swarm, the queen ant's diet would need to include specific minerals. Alternatively, Luo Wen considered enhancing the fungal carpet by integrating the metal snail's genes. Since it could already break down rocks and minerals, this genetic addition might enable it to extract the required materials more effectively. With the challenges of oxygen deprivation, low temperatures, and cosmic radiation resolved, Luo Wen made significant progress towards spacefaring capabilities. The remaining hurdle was energy acquisition. Once solved, Luo Wen would evolve into a true space-dwelling organism, with the swarm following suit. Another year passed. The Rat Folk's rocket propulsion research hit a bottleneck. Returning to old methods, they increased the number of thrusters, from 1.4 to 1.6, and then to 1.8, bringing their rockets ever closer to the moon. Over the same year, Luo Wen delved into numerous research papers and discovered a new application for the swarm network. He could extract and clone specific memories from the Rat Folk's collective intelligence. It felt like forcibly downloading a book into his mind, allowing him to sift through the useful parts. While this saved time compared to traditional reading, it came with downsides. The memory extraction captured an entire time frame, including potentially unsavory personal experiences. After a particularly embarrassing incident, Luo Wen expunged the cloned memory with great effort and resolved to use this method sparingly. Still, a year of study provided Luo Wen with ideas on how to harvest energy in space.
Chapter 156, The Internal Ecosystem Chamber. With setbacks in rocket propulsion research, some of the rat folk proposed building a space station in planetary orbit as a means of collecting data and conducting further studies. This idea inspired a subset of researchers to pursue related projects. One article suggested creating a self-sustaining ecosystem chamber aboard the space station. Plants could absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, while rat folk would breathe the oxygen and produce carbon dioxide. Establishing a closed-loop system. Although implementing such a system would be far more complicated than the article implied, the concept gave Luo Wen a new direction for his experiments. Previously, Luo Wen had focused on directly harnessing cosmic radiation. He had made some progress. Certain thermal radiation could provide large amounts of heat energy, but he had yet to find a method to convert that heat into biological energy, leaving him stuck in a dead end. Now, he had a fresh idea. Luo Wen already had the ability to integrate plant cells into his body, even incorporating chloroplasts. The ecosystem chamber concept seemed feasible for internal adaptation. Driven by inspiration, he began working immediately. His body was already sealed into an airtight structure from prior experiments with survival in oxygen-deprived environments, making it a natural closed chamber. He added numerous chloroplasts to his skin cells but quickly ran into compatibility issues. His optical stealth system and magnetic field generation system were also located in the skin. Adding chloroplasts risked disrupting their functions. Unable to resolve this, Luo Wen relocated the chloroplasts to a lower part of his body. However, this introduced a new challenge: limited light exposure. He experimented with using the nanocrystals from the optical stealth system to reflect light to the chloroplast's new location. This required creating dedicated light pathways and adding additional nanocrystals inside his body to enhance reflection. Otherwise, the small contact area would result in inefficient energy conversion, a highly inconvenient solution. Luo Wen resigned himself to this approach until a few days later, when he came across another paper. It suggested that plants could grow under artificial lighting or bioluminescence. The revelation hit Luo Wen like a bolt of lightning. Though he knew little about bioluminescence, this solution seemed promising. While installing artificial lights inside his body was out of the question, bioluminescent organisms provided an ideal alternative. Many insects and deep-sea creatures naturally emitted light. Luo Wen began experimenting immediately. Bioluminescent organisms typically contained a special gene that produced light cells. These cells housed two chemicals that reacted under specific catalysts, releasing energy almost entirely as light with minimal heat, a highly efficient illumination method. Luo Wen relocated the chloroplasts to an internal cavity surrounded by light cells. He then modified his respiratory system to direct carbon dioxide into the cavity, where the chloroplasts absorbed it and released oxygen. The result? Luo Wen became a glowing organism, or perhaps, a biomecha with built-in lighting. This system was far more reliable than his earlier design but still fell short of a perfect cycle, requiring periodic replenishment of water and other materials. Thanks to his tail-large storage organ, however, this periodic replenishment could be measured in years. Thus, Luo Wen had addressed almost every challenge posed by space travel. All that remained was acquiring a suitable vessel. Overlord, don't you think our latest masterpiece is stunning? Morgan asked, his tone full of self-admiration. Luo Wen, observing the rocket remotely through Morgan's perspective, replied via the swarm network, stunning? I'm speechless. Your praise is most gratifying, Overlord. That wasn't praise, you fool. Can't you tell I'm being sarcastic? Perhaps it's a limitation of consciousness communication. I cannot detect tone. Luo Wen briefly considered retraining the rat folk scientist before turning his attention back to the rocket. Admittedly, the design left him astonished. The rat folk had devised a novel approach, strapping 36 secondary thrusters onto a single rocket. As a self-proclaimed intellectual, Luo Wen couldn't help but criticize the design's absurdity. The drag in the atmosphere alone would be monumental, and directional control seemed nearly impossible. Regret bubbled within him. He had entrusted his body to this mission. Yes, this was the vessel that would carry Luo Wen to the moon. It represented the pinnacle of rat folk ingenuity, resembling nothing more than a giant stick bound with over 30 grenades. This was the rat folk's first serious attempt to land on the moon. Even Empress Kerrigan had arrived at the command center to personally oversee the launch ceremony. Can this contraption really fly? Luo Wen asked, skeptical. Rest assured, Overlord, Morgan replied confidently. We are highly experienced with strapped booster rockets. While the drag is indeed significant within the atmosphere, it becomes irrelevant once we breach it. Our calculations confirm that 36 secondary thrusters can definitely propel the rocket's core to the moon. Fine. Your verbosity convinces me. Luo Wen felt a sliver of relief after Morgan's detailed explanation. Luo Wen's body, secured under the guise of a volunteer organism, had been placed in a transparent box filled with observation instruments and loaded onto the rocket. Accompanying him were other equipment and an all-terrain rover. Shortly afterward, Morgan confirmed via intercom. Overlord, the special organism has been secured on the rocket. Luo Wen nodded, then remembered this was consciousness communication and replied, understood. The connection between Luo Wen's main body and the brood nest remained his closely guarded secret. Even the most loyal and network-integrated rat folk had no access to this information. It wasn't a matter of mistrust but of caution. Luo Wen had long believed he wasn't the universe's only exceptional being. Who knew what other peculiar abilities might exist? Better safe than sorry. Paranoia was the ultimate survival skill. Chapter 157, Ignition. Once everything was ready, Empress Kerrigan issued the command, and the rocket launch countdown began. 10 seconds later, amidst billowing smoke, the rocket, resembling a cluster grenade, spewed flames as it shot toward the sky. The rocket steadily gained altitude. Its bundled secondary boosters, grouped in sets of 4, detached from the main body once their fuel was depleted. Perhaps due to the rocket's overly unique design and significant air resistance. Luo Wen experienced violent vibrations while confined in the cargo bay at the rocket's nose. The ride was exceedingly uncomfortable. Were it not for his resilient body, he might have been smashed to pulp within the cramped confines. Fortunately, the rocket's speed was commendable. After 20 minutes, utilizing a total of 3 sets of 12 secondary boosters, it successfully exited the atmosphere. The rocket then employed another set of boosters to reach planetary orbit. The boosters shut down as the rocket was captured by the planet's gravity. This planet had 2 moons, both similar in size and mass. The yellow-white moon appeared larger than the red-white one due to its closer proximity. Luo Wen's target this time was the yellow moon. After several failed attempts, the rat folk had calculated a precise and feasible landing trajectory through meticulous computations. The rocket remained in orbit for more than 10 hours, circling half the planet. Then, the boosters reignited, propelling the rocket onto a lunar-bound trajectory. The next 2 days were uneventful. Luo Wen spent this time in idle stasis, sparing himself the misery of enduring the cramped space. Vitals of the test subject are normal, but signs of low activity suggest potential injuries from severe vibrations during atmospheric exit, a uniformed female rat folk reported to Morgan while monitoring the instruments. Empress Kerrigan had left shortly after the rocket exited the atmosphere. Now, Morgan, the director of the Imperial Space Research Institute, was overseeing operations. Morgan was well aware of the test subject's nature. It was undoubtedly one of the Swarm Overlord's specially engineered bodies. Morgan also knew about the Overlord experiments in private laboratories, and this body was likely one of the results. This mission served to test its performance in space. 2 days later, through Morgan's perspective, Luo Wen learned that the rocket was approaching the yellow moon's orbit. In 3 hours, it would collide with the yellow moon. Yes, collide. With no atmosphere on the yellow moon to slow descent, the rocket's impact would be direct and unmitigated. This meant Luo Wen was in for a hardcore landing. As the rocket approached, tension mounted in the control center. The rat folk responsible for monitoring data didn't dare blink. The rocket, now with only 4 secondary boosters left, was running out of fuel. 30 minutes before impact, the last 4 boosters exhausted their fuel and began detachment procedures. The metal framework securing the boosters to the rocket was remotely unlocked. This 132 configuration was being used for the first time, and this was also the first time a Rat-Folk spacecraft had traveled this far. Inevitably, a malfunction occurred. One of the secondary boosters failed to eject properly due to a malfunction in its release mechanism. As a result, it collided with the rocket's main body during separation, damaging the rocket's engine base. In the ground control center, piercing alarms blared. Observation devices showed damage to the rocket's engine on the right side, though the extent was unclear. Shortly thereafter, black smoke began billowing from the rocket's base. After limping along for several more minutes, the engine exploded, followed by the fuel tank. The rocket's nose, along with the cargo bay, was blasted away from the plume of smoke, veering off its planned trajectory. Panic erupted among the Rat-Folk as they frantically recalculated the trajectory. Luo Wen recalled an old adage from a wise man: ugly weapons are usually unreliable. Thinking back to the rocket's cluster grenade-like design, he realized why he doubted its reliability from the beginning. Given its catastrophically ugly design, an accident seemed almost inevitable. Luo Wen was speechless. His body was now tumbling and spiraling through deep space, potentially destined to become a mere speck of decoration in the cosmic void. However, he could always self-destruct his body and regenerate back on the planet. So losing one insect form wasn't a major issue. The real problem was the lengthy delay for another lunar mission, and the bitterness of seeing his long-awaited hopes dashed. Time ticked away. After intense calculations, the Rat-Folk gathered new information. "Overlord, are you still there?" Morgan asked. "What's the situation?" Luo Wen's voice echoed in his mind. "Overlord, the outlook is grim." Luo Wen had anticipated this outcome. It seemed another delay was inevitable. However, there's still a chance to salvage the situation, Morgan added after a pause. Luo Wen was momentarily irritated, suspecting Morgan was deliberately being cryptic, though he had no proof. Perhaps he could just dig into Morgan's mind to find out. The rocket's nose and cargo bay will be captured by the Yellow Moon's gravity in 10 minutes, entering its orbit, Morgan quickly continued, sensing Luo Wen's ominous thoughts. But before Luo Wen could relax, Morgan added, however, although the rocket's propulsion system was destroyed, its initial speed was too high. With minimal resistance in space, it will exceed the escape velocity of the Yellow Moon after being captured, remaining in orbit for 34 minutes before being flung into deep space. Luo Wen became serious, understanding the gravity of Morgan's statement. "So, I need to control the insect form to detach from the rocket within this 34-minute window?" "Yes, Overlord. What are your suggestions?" "There are 2 options. First, after detaching from the rocket, the insect form's speed will be 3.5 km per second. You'll need to decelerate to and maintain a speed of 2 km per second to stay in orbit. Then, at the right moment, accelerate to 2.5 km per second to leave orbit and head for the Yellow Moon." And the second option? Chapter 158, Separation. The second option is to detach from the rocket and, instead of decelerating, accelerate inward toward the Yellow Moon. The rocket will be flung out of lunar orbit, while the insect body accelerates toward the moon's surface, Morgan explained, stroking his whiskers. Although the gesture seemed incongruous with his younger body, it had become a habit. "What are the pros and cons of each plan?" Luo Wen asked after some thought. "The first option offers higher safety. Staying in lunar orbit provides ample time for observation and finding the right moment. The downside is the difficulty of accelerating the insect body by an additional 0.5 km per second during detachment. The second option's advantage is immediate action. You can proceed to the moon landing without delay. However, the opportunity is fleeting, and the descent carries significant risk due to high speed. What will you choose, Overlord?" Luo Wen pondered. His primary body's Gatling system had been replaced with a jet propulsion system during anaerobic tests. He wasn't confident in its ability to increase speed by 0.5 km per second. Failure would mean being trapped in lunar orbit and forced to self-destruct, awaiting another chance. The second option appeared riskier, but its challenges were mainly in timing and deceleration during the landing. With his reaction speed and ultra-high resolution vision, he was confident he could manage timely deceleration. After conveying his decision to Morgan, Morgan immediately mobilized personnel to recalculate trajectories. 10 minutes later, the rocket has been captured by the yellow moon's gravity and is entering lunar orbit, a researcher monitoring the screens reported. The rocket has entered lunar orbit and will leave it in 34 minutes. The rocket has been in orbit for 19 minutes. Calculations remain unchanged. It will leave orbit in 15 minutes. Let's begin. Morgan, Luo Wen's voice echoed in Morgan's mind. Luo Wen would need to focus entirely on controlling his insect body, leaving ground operations to Morgan. Morgan, through the swarm network, pulled trusted personnel into a private channel and began directing. Plans originally reserved for post-lunar landing had to be implemented ahead of schedule. Suddenly, alarms blared in the ground control center. Report: monitoring in the rocket's cargo bay has failed. What's the cause? Morgan asked, maintaining a calm expression that betrayed no hint of the unfolding chaos. Likely the result of the earlier fuel tank explosion, which destabilized the cabin. The rocket remains under the moon's gravitational pull, accelerating as the cabin deforms, a researcher speculated. Before Morgan could respond, another observer shouted, "Report. The test subject's life support pod has lost contact. Vital signs are gone. Report. The cargo bay is compromised. The rocket's nose has separated from the bay, and internal gases are leaking." The control room descended into chaos, red lights flashing as bad news piled up. Meanwhile, Luo Wen, after the monitoring failure, easily opened the transparent container restraining him. Smashing a protective case on the cabin wall, he revealed a red button inside. Feigning a deep breath, Luo Wen pressed the button. With a loud bang, the rocket's nose cone was ejected. Since the cabin contained air, sound traveled, making the ejection noise audible. The connection between the nose cone and the cargo bay revealed a large circular hole. Through it, the pitch-black expanse of space was visible. Before Luo Wen could appreciate the view, the cabin's escaping air swept him and various debris out through the opening. As he tumbled, Luo Wen increased the refresh rate of his vision. To him, the surrounding debris, the rocket's nose cone, and the cargo bay seemed to drift away in slow motion. Now adrift in space without any external protection, he immediately felt the extreme conditions. The side of his body facing the sun soared above 300 degrees Celsius. Thankfully, he had anticipated this, incorporating nano-heat-resistant materials from a mantis shrimp's hammer into his carapace. Without them, the high temperature would have inflicted severe damage. The side facing away from the sun plunged to minus 200 degrees Celsius, creating a temperature gradient of several hundred degrees. Meanwhile, his body continued to spin uncontrollably, producing a uniquely unpleasant sensation. His internal power system activated, supplying energy to his magnetic field generator. Blue electrical arcs danced across his carapace as a small magnetic field enveloped his body. Simultaneously, small vents on his body released jets of gas, gradually reducing his spin until he stabilized. Once his body stopped spinning, the vents closed immediately. In the vacuum of space, where replenishing air was impossible, the expelled gas came from his reserves. His muscles vibrated, bioluminescent organs lit up, and chloroplasts began working. The reserves in his tail fat organ rapidly depleted. Though wasteful, this generated copious amounts of oxygen and carbon dioxide necessary for both directional changes and deceleration during descent. The rocket and debris, though initially near him, maintained the same velocity, drifting away slowly. 5 minutes later, Luo Wen glanced back at the rat folk creation one last time. Silently bidding it farewell, he acknowledged that they might never cross paths again in the vastness of space. Farewell complete, Luo Wen turned around. With the aid of his vents, he adjusted his trajectory by about 30 degrees toward the yellow moon. His propulsion system lacked the power for a perpendicular descent, which would only slow him down. Instead, he altered his angle slightly, allowing his current velocity to carry him toward the moon. In the featureless void of space, movement felt imperceptible, though his velocity was immense. As soon as he adjusted his angle, the rocket and debris disappeared from view. His course set, all that remained was to wait. He needed to travel for more than 10 hours, orbiting the moon 1.5 times before impact. This plan, meticulously calculated by several of Morgan's trusted aides, was now in motion. Unfortunately, without his monitoring equipment, Luo Wen couldn't precisely track his speed or position. From the moment he left the rocket, everything depended on his instincts. Thankfully, with the swarm network, he didn't have to stay inside his body for the entire journey. Instead, he could collaborate with Morgan and the others to refine the next phase of their plan. Chapter 159, Landing. Time passed, and Luo Wen's consciousness returned to his primary body. According to calculations, he was still 2 hours away from impacting the yellow moon. However, given the numerous unexpected variables, these calculations were no longer reliable. From this moment onward, he could land at any time. He had to remain vigilant, as his current velocity was near 3.5 kilometers per second. A single moment of carelessness could result in a catastrophic crash on the moon's surface. To avoid distractions, Luo Wen connected over 100 blades to the swarm network, sharing his body's perspective with them. He doubted any mishaps could occur with such robust support. The view in space was stunning, but over time it became monotonous, with unchanging scenery and utter silence. Thankfully, with the blades acting as high-level ice to monitor his surroundings, Luo Wen had the luxury of some lighthearted banter over the network to stave off boredom. He even took the opportunity to name the nearby planet Genesis Planet, as it was the birthplace of the swarm. Luo Wen reasoned that as an insect destined to conquer the stars and seas, having a compelling backstory was essential. Titles like Zhao Zilong of Chongshan or Zhang Yi of Yan inspired him. Now that Genesis Planet had a name, he could proudly declare in future encounters, "I am Genesis F2A." With some accomplishments under his belt, perhaps this name alone would strike fear into his enemies. Before his imagination could spiral further, the blades raised an alert. Luo Wen realized his trajectory was veering toward the moon. He quickly abandoned his banter with the rat folk and focused his full attention on the task at hand. His orbital position was about 120 kilometers above the moon's surface, and at his current speed of 3.5 kilometers per second, a direct descent would take just over half a minute. However, since he was approaching at an oblique angle, the time would be slightly longer. The lunar surface expanded rapidly in his vision. Luo Wen needed to time his deceleration perfectly. Decelerating too early could leave him stuck in orbit, too late, and he'd end up a splattered mess on the surface. At 20 kilometers from the surface, Luo Wen's black insect body suddenly opened all forward-facing vents, expelling gas at full force. His body, moving at extreme speed, was violently decelerated. The opposing forces of momentum and thrust nearly crushed his frame. Fortunately, his carapace had been reinforced with flexible cartilage inspired by deep-sea creatures. While this made him less resistant to physical attacks, it significantly enhanced his structural resilience under pressure. Moreover, metallic ions within the carapace ensured his physical defenses were not entirely compromised. Though 20 kilometers seemed far, at Luo Wen's speed it passed in less than 6 seconds. Even with the intense braking, his landing velocity was still near 1 kilometer per second. A plume of lunar dust erupted from a vast crater on the moon's surface, forming a hazy ring before gradually settling. The scene resembled a silent film, devoid of any sound. "Overlord, what's your status?" Morgan inquired. Luo Wen hadn't shared his perspective with the rat folk. The sudden silence during their conversation hinted that Luo Wen was focused on his landing. Morgan mentally calculated the time. The landing, whether successful or disastrous, should have concluded by now. Yet Luo Wen's prolonged silence left him uncertain, eventually compelling him to ask. At that moment, Luo Wen was assessing his injuries. Despite using his back, his strongest and most impact-resistant area, for the landing, the impact had still taken a toll. Cracks marred the back armor, the magnetic field structure sustained damage, and a small section lost its protective field. Fortunately, the crater he created wasn't deep, and his relatively compact body fit snugly within it. Using surrounding lunar soil for cover, he could shield himself from radiation, though the extreme cold seeped through. His segmented structures near the damage site closed in time, but the chill was still uncomfortable. Luo Wen flexed his appendages. Both claw arms and his 8 legs were intact, but many joints were damaged and required repair. Elsewhere, his condition wasn't critical, but the energy reserves in his tail-lard storage organ had dropped by over 50%. Repairing his injuries would deplete them further, and in his current situation, replenishing energy on the moon wasn't an option. Rapid depletion was an ominous prospect. Fortunately, Luo Wen had contingency plans for such situations. Somewhat dicey, but I'm alive, Luo Wen quipped, sparing a moment to reassure Morgan before mobilizing his body. Turning to the crater he had created, Luo Wen began digging deeper. Excavation was second nature to him, and his movements were efficient and fluid. However, the moon's surface consisted of only a thin layer of soft regolith, underlain by solid rock. Luckily, his think tank had anticipated this. His claw arms had been upgraded with metallic particles, increasing their hardness significantly. They now excelled at both digging and breaking through rock. Despite the enhancements, breaking rock was far more challenging than digging through soil. After laboriously extending the crater by 2 to 3 meters, Luo Wen paused. After a brief moment of retching, his body expelled a small spore capsule, the seed for a fungal carpet. This enhanced version, designed for space environments, would determine Luo Wen's ability to thrive in the cosmos. He had meticulously prepared for this moment, choosing the genetic traits of a beast with 4 stomachs. This creature could rapidly consume large amounts of food and regurgitate it later in a safe location for gradual digestion. While Luo Wen found the process distasteful, he valued its storage capabilities. Of the 4 stomachs, only 1 produced gastric acid, the other 3 functioned as storage spaces. This feature made it easy to store and retrieve items, even if the process was a bit unappealing. For the dream of conquering the stars, Luo Wen was willing to accept such compromises. Placing the fungal carpet seed at the bottom of the crater, Luo Wen covered it with loose stones and dust. Though the conditions were far from ideal, no water or fertilizer, the seed had a built-in nutrient pack stored within its capsule. This starter resource would allow it to take root and grow. After ensuring the seed was buried, Luo Wen moved on to the next task at hand. Chapter 160, The Second Brood Nest. Out of responsibility for the swarm's future development, and admittedly, a bit for his own safety, Luo Wen had long been researching ways to enable the brood queens to download his primary genetic code. Alternatively, he sought methods to produce additional bodies or brood nests. After exhaustive research and experimentation, he concluded that having the brood queens download his original genetic code via a cloud storage system was currently beyond his capabilities. However, he had gained insights into creating more bodies or brood nests. Through trial, error, and some creative leaps, Luo Wen discovered that forcibly severing a body or brood nest from the swarm network effectively granted him the authority to produce another part. Simply put, disconnecting them from the network and simulating their death allowed him to incubate replacements. While the concept seemed straightforward, implementation was extraordinarily challenging. He needed to focus all his energy on severing a body or brood nest from the network, a process requiring tens of hours of uninterrupted effort until the new entity was fully incubated. Luo Wen positioned his body over the spore capsule, using surrounding dust to seal the pit before beginning his cocooning process. Meanwhile, on Genesis Planet, deep within a subterranean nest 3,000 meters below the surface, a brood nest began secreting viscous fluid from its surface. Its massive body rapidly shrank as the liquid hardened, encasing the brood nest in an amber-like shell. This was Luo Wen's first formal attempt at regenerating a brood nest. Previous efforts were purely theoretical, so he had no guarantee he could sustain his focus for the necessary tens of hours. To mitigate risks, he prepared multiple contingencies. The brood nest utilized a pseudo-death ability derived from specific insect species. These creatures could expel most of their bodily fluids to encase themselves in an amber-like shell that was incredibly resilient, capable of withstanding most external threats. Within the shell, the creature entered a pseudo-death state, with its life force nearly extinguished. Without external stimulation, it could essentially die. While this ability was typically disastrous, turning pseudo-death into actual death, it was ideal for Luo Wen's purpose. The brood nest's pseudo-death significantly eased the energy drain required to isolate it from the swarm network. Surges of energy coursed through the swarm network, forcibly severing the pseudo-dead brood nest's connection. Simultaneously, the energy reserves in Luo Wen's tail-lard storage organ began to deplete rapidly. Since Luo Wen's consciousness had decoupled from his physical body, he remained fully alert while his body entered its cocooned state. He redirected all available energy to the incubation process, entirely deprioritizing the repair of his injuries. As time passed, Luo Wen concentrated on severing the brood nest's connection to the swarm network. Meanwhile, on the yellow moon, his cocooned body began developing a bulge at the rear, which grew steadily larger. During this period, the fungal carpet seed beneath his body also came to life. Supported by the external spore capsule, it rapidly sprouted roots that extended deep underground. Luo Wen felt a wave of relief upon observing the fungal carpet's progress. Given the limited payload of the rocket and his body's size constraints, he had brought only one seed. If it failed to take root, the entire lunar mission would have been for naught. The carpet's roots secreted a substance called lichen fluid, which efficiently dissolved the hard rock below. The yellow moon contained water resources, though they were unevenly distributed and existed primarily as solid ice due to the frigid temperatures. Luck favored Luo Wen. His crash had created a crater about a meter deep, and his subsequent digging extended it by another 2 to 3 meters. Within 5 days, the fungal carpet's roots had penetrated roughly 10 meters further, eventually discovering solid ice crystals. As the roots penetrated the rocky layers, they also absorbed various metals. The enhanced version of the fungal carpet incorporated Luo Wen's advanced space technology. With access to water, it transitioned from relying on the spore capsule to becoming self-sufficient. Equipped with modules for producing metallic particles, magnetic field generators, and self-illumination systems, the carpet accelerated its growth. A root from the fungal carpet extended into the cracked cocoon enveloping Luo Wen's body. Incubating a brood nest demanded immense energy. With his tail lard reserves nearly depleted, the carpet's timely intervention prevented Luo Wen from resorting to consuming his own flesh to sustain the process. Having overcome the initial challenges, the fungal carpet not only supported Luo Wen but also continued to expand its infrastructure. By the time the brood nest incubation was complete, the carpet's main body had spread throughout the pit, glowing with multicolored light that flickered and shifted. This illumination system, an enhancement designed by Luo Wen, replaced the monotonous yellow-green glow of its predecessors with a more diverse palette inspired by marine bioluminescent creatures. However, gazing at the vibrant, nightclub-like lights within the pit, Luo Wen couldn't help but think of certain earthly entertainment venues. He briefly considered reverting the lighting system to something less gaudy. Once the new brood nest completed incubation, it conducted a self-diagnostic before detaching from Luo Wen's body and interfacing with the fungal carpet to begin producing space-adapted swarm units. These units required specialized components for surviving in space, making them significantly more complex and costly to produce. For example, magnetic field generators necessitated metal resources, driving up their production cost to many times that of their terrestrial counterparts. Despite their expense, the emergence of these space-adapted units marked the swarm's expansion beyond its homeworld. The harsh conditions of outer space would no longer confine the swarm. To distinguish them, Luo Wen named the original brood nest on Genesis planet the Genesis brood nest, while the newly created one on the Yellow Moon was christened the Yellow Moon brood nest, reflecting their respective birthplaces. After the Yellow Moon brood nest came online, the Genesis brood nest initiated its reawakening sequence. The amber encasing it began to dissolve as pre-prepared nutrients flowed from the fungal carpet. The brood nest's desiccated body swelled like an inflating balloon, regaining its full form within an hour. Reawakened, the Genesis brood nest seamlessly integrated with the Yellow Moon brood nest. Luo Wen noted that the swarm network seemed to grow stronger as a result. Chapter 161, Shift of Focus. The transport capabilities of rockets were simply too poor. Using them to deploy the swarm into space would be unimaginably inefficient and costly. From the very beginning, Luo Wen's plan was to use a rocket to send himself to the moon and then redevelop the swarm there. This plan had been decided even before Luo Wen began cultivating the ratfolk and small dinosaurs. He had even considered an all-or-nothing gamble. Once his main body reached the moon, he would destroy the brood nest still on the Genesis planet. If successful, the starting point of the swarm would leap forward by several levels. With its low gravity and lack of atmosphere, the moon was an ideal base for launching into the stars, significantly reducing the difficulty of such an endeavor. Of course, this plan was initially extremely risky. At that time, Luo Wen was not yet a network being, had not discovered that the brood nest could also hatch his main body, and was unaware of the forced logout function. It's easy to imagine how much thought cautious Luo Wen put into this plan before deciding on it. Perhaps it was his cautious mindset that influenced his talents, or maybe luck played a role. One by one, new abilities were discovered, gradually reducing the risks associated with this plan. By the end, even in the event of failure, the loss would be minimal, just some time wasted. And for the current Luo Wen, time was the cheapest resource. As long as he could endure it, even tens of thousands of years were a trivial matter. Luo Wen's main body took some time at the fungal carpet to replenish the reserves of his tail-lard storage organ. Then he entered a cocooning state to repair his body. Meanwhile, the yellow moon brood nest began producing mature worker ants. However, given the brood nest's size, the initial development of the lunar base would be slow. With little to do for now, Luo Wen returned his consciousness to the Genesis planet. Morgan, the lunar base has been established, Luo Wen announced. In the command hall of the Rocket Launch Center, some ratfolk were still busy. They were researchers who had unfortunately died over the years for various reasons. After undergoing modifications via the swarm network, they were given young bodies, followed Morgan's example, and infiltrated the Imperial Space Research Institute once more. After the rocket engine and fuel tank explosion, researchers without node identities had been sent by Morgan to write up their experiences elsewhere. Those who remained were all insiders, helping Luo Wen calculate data. Although they couldn't observe Luo Wen directly, the remnants of the rocket had accompanied him for a long time. The rocket was equipped with various positioning instruments. Thanks to their data, Luo Wen was able to precisely time his accelerations and turns. While there were slight errors in the data, the overall result was a successful landing, largely due to their efforts. Excellent, Lord Overlord. The swarm has finally taken this step and is on the path to becoming a stellar race. As a member of the swarm, I feel deeply honored, Morgan said. Morgan, who had once been a teacher to the Empress, was a master of flattery. Though he had grown somewhat rusty with age and authority, a little practice quickly restored his finesse. All right, you've all done well this time. However, as insiders, a verbal commendation is enough, Luo Wen replied. Actually, even verbal commendations weren't necessary. Being an insider carried significant weight. Among them, the only one who was still somewhat impure was the current Empress Kerrigan. But considering the lifespan of ratfolk, it would only take another 20 to 30 years before she became entirely pure. Morgan showed no objection to verbal praise, as if it was entirely expected. What is the next plan, Lord Overlord? Morgan asked. Luo Wen considered for a moment. Having established a base on the moon, there was little use in further rocket research. He had painstakingly nurtured the ratfolk civilization, but not to allow them to advance their own agenda. Rocket development can continue, but all personnel involved must either become insiders or backups. Going forward, the ratfolk's focus should shift to other disciplines. Their previous technological trajectory has been rather skewed. It's time to encourage balanced development. Lord Overlord insight is unparalleled. As the director of the Imperial Space Research Institute, I've realized that devoting excessive resources to aerospace technology has been highly inappropriate. This has squeezed out other disciplines, creating unnecessary conflicts. To promote harmony among the ratfolk, I'll propose to Her Majesty that aerospace funding be reduced in favor of other fields. Excellent reasoning, logical and convincing, Luo Wen replied. If this weren't a telepathic exchange, he would have applauded Morgan. Several days later, on the lunar base, the brood nest had produced mature worker ants, worker drones, and their eggs. It had also created a queen ant egg, which Luo Wen relocated before it hatched. The egg was moved to a new base on the moon's far side and had since hatched into a larva. Once it matured, the swarm's ability to mass-produce forces on the moon would increase significantly. After all, this was the swarm's classic opening strategy: produce farmers, then rapidly expand bases. Future development would focus on the moon's far side. Since the yellow moon had no rotation, it always showed the same face to the Genesis planet. If the ratfolk's technological trajectory eventually led to widespread telescope use, it was better for their mental well-being that they didn't see anything unusual on the moon. In the following days, Luo Wen shifted his focus to the lunar base. Under his leadership, the swarm discovered 2 mines rich in mineral resources. The extracted metal particles were suitable for manufacturing magnetic field generators. With the help of worker drones, the fungal carpet quickly spread across the mining areas. With light, water, and metal resources secured, the swarm's production needs were met. The population of insects on the moon increased rapidly. Since there were no hostile forces on the moon, no combat units were produced initially. Instead, all resources were devoted to worker drones and support units. Due to the moon's low gravity, many unit designs could be scaled up without modifying their templates. For example, burrower ants could easily exceed 10 centimeters in length under the original template. By slightly strengthening their leg bones and muscles, they could grow to over a meter in size. However, their external skeletons required them to spend more time in the larval stage to achieve larger sizes. Chapter 162, A Stepping Stone. The burrower ants were tasked with heavy labor, so their external skeletons had to be retained. Fortunately, on the moon, the fungal carpet was growing even faster than the insects, already covering a vast area. The lunar base currently had an abundance of resources. Raising some larger insects wouldn't be a burden. As time passed, various models of burrower ants emerged from their cocoons. Once their exoskeletons hardened underground, they quickly began their intensive work. Since insect eggs and larvae lacked magnetic field generators, they had to be shielded from radiation deep underground during their early growth stages. The initial production of burrower ants was aimed at this goal. With their increased size, their work became much more efficient. Over 3 months, 5 simple, large underground bases had been roughly excavated. The subsequent finishing work would wait until more small burrower ants and worker drones were available to refine them gradually. During this time, the number of brood queens increased to 10, with 2 stationed in each base, working tirelessly to replenish the workforce. The lunar base gradually entered a stable development phase. As its supply systems and production units became more complete, its growth would only accelerate. Thus, it was time to prepare for the next phase of plans. Conquering a small moon was certainly not the swarm's ultimate goal. If that were the case, Luo Wen might as well remain on the Genesis planet and become a planetary lord. The moon was merely a stepping stone. With no atmosphere, it was an ideal launch site for the swarm. However, Luo Wen couldn't establish a rocket launch base on the moon. It lacked any industrial foundation and was devoid of certain critical raw materials. The Ratfolk's rocket technology system was not applicable here. Currently, the swarm could utilize a jet propulsion system to fly in zero-gravity environments until its energy reserves were exhausted. It could also glide a short distance using inertia. But space was vast. A flight range capable of circling the Genesis planet several times was negligible on a cosmic scale. Even though jet-propelled flight was several times faster than the storm god's flight speed on the Genesis planet, it was still laughably slow when considering the distances between celestial bodies. Naturally, Luo Wen would not choose such a mode of transportation. Otherwise, by the time his jet-propelled bugs left the star system, the Ratfolk might already have spacefaring ships. Of course, this scenario would never happen. If the Ratfolk ever developed the ability to threaten the swarm, they would face extermination long before that. Returning to the main topic, Luo Wen's current idea revolved around the mantis shrimp dubbed the alien mecha. This creature possessed several black technologies ideal for space travel. For instance, the hyperbolic system on its hammer. Studies showed that if this system were magnified dozens of times with sufficiently strong materials to support its operation, it could generate kinetic energy so immense that it could hurl rocks directly to the moon in the absence of atmospheric resistance. Luo Wen's dual pincers utilized this system in a weakened form. It significantly enhanced their flexibility and, when fully powered, provided formidable attack strength. Although its activation required a substantial energy cost each time, its capabilities were undeniable. Luo Wen had relied on it to survive many life or death situations. However, due to material limitations, even Luo Wen's so-called full power usage only unleashed a fraction of its potential. But on the moon, with no air resistance and only minimal gravity, a well-designed version of this system could become the swarm's most suitable transportation method. The structure of the system required no modifications. For now, Luo Wen lacked the ability to enhance its capabilities. Instead, he focused on the materials. Luo Wen chose to integrate plant cells into the hammer cannon's material alongside its existing components. Plant cells, with their thick, sturdy, and slightly elastic cell walls, could maintain their shape, increase mechanical strength, regulate osmotic pressure, and provide excellent defense. Even so, the new material could only withstand one full power operation of the hyperbolic system before self-destructing under severe overload. Thus, Luo Wen designed the components as disposable modules attached externally to the fungal carpet. The initial launch device resembled a massive fleshy lump, placed at strategic locations and connected to the fungal carpet. Nourished by the carpet's nutrients, the device would grow into something akin to a single-armed trebuchet. The fungal carpet anchoring it ensured stability, while the device's own extensive root system penetrated up to 100 meters underground for additional support. When ready to launch, the fungal carpet would channel sufficient energy into the device to activate its hyperbolic ejection system, propelling the payload at an astonishing velocity. After firing, most of the device's structure would be destroyed by the extreme overload. Given its high cost, this method of launching was undeniably extravagant. However, with the Moon's resources freely available to the swarm and no need to produce many combat units, most resources could be allocated to manufacturing these launch devices. Because of its retro design and resemblance to a single-armed trebuchet, Luo Wen named the device the Orbital Sling. The Orbital Sling's payloads were also specially designed. The payload consisted of a spore capsule encased in a lichen-like structure made from various rocky materials. This design gave the capsule the appearance of a meteor during its spaceflight. This was a byproduct of Luo Wen's earlier radiation experiments. While the material provided excellent radiation resistance, its rigidity and poor ductility made it unsuitable for mobility armor. However, it was perfect for camouflage. Beneath the lichen layer was a heat-resistant nanostructure to protect against atmospheric friction during re-entry on planets with atmospheres. Inside was a highly concentrated nutrient layer encasing fungal carpet seeds, several worker drone eggs, and one brood queen egg. Since the spore capsule lacked a magnetic field generator, the contents would enter a dormant state to endure extreme external conditions. This design allowed the swarm to quickly establish a rudimentary base in new environments. The research, manufacturing, and preparation of these devices took Luo Wen over a year. Now, on the Moon's far side, 3 orbital slings grew atop a slightly elevated hill on the purple-hued ground. Around one of the orbital slings, a dozen ratfolk busily worked on final adjustments. After so much preparation, it was time to test the system in action. Chapter 163, Take a Shot. These rat folk had already been converted into node units, effectively becoming allies. Luo Wen had prepared some space-adapted rat folk bodies on the Moon beforehand, then extracted their consciousnesses from their bodies on the Genesis planet and transferred them into the lunar bodies. This instantly achieved the milestone of rat folk's first, second, third, all the way to the 11th lunar landing. The orbital sling had a long-standing issue that had persisted since Luo Wen acquired the hyperbolic system. Its accuracy was dreadful. It epitomized the saying, brute force works wonders. Unless used for point-blank shots, its accuracy was so poor that hitting a target felt miraculous. In space, where distances are measured in light years, even a 1 mm deviation at the start could result in unimaginable off-target impacts over a light year's span. Thus, there was significant room for improvement. The rat folk researchers had been specifically brought here by Luo Wen to address this issue. Unfortunately, the rat folk's technological development was heavily unbalanced. Rocket engine technology and related fields were leaps and bounds ahead, while radar, computing, and communication technologies lagged significantly. Their calculations required a substantial amount of practical data to back them up. After a flurry of intense debugging, various initial data points were recorded, and the orbital sling entered its launch countdown. Overlord, do you think this experiment will succeed? Through the swarm network, Luo Wen had included Morgan, a few rat folk intelligences, and some blades into a group chat. Everyone shared the visual feed of several scout bugs with eagle-like vision, closely monitoring the entire launch process. The eagle eye bug was a new reconnaissance insect developed by Luo Wen, inspired by the principle of telescopes. Shaped like a giant eyeball, it lacked limbs, mouth, or nose. It relied on internal hydrogen generation and jet propulsion for mobility and received sustenance through a rear connection to the fungal carpet. Its eyeball incorporated the genes of multiple organisms, and while it appeared to have just one eye, it hid dozens of pupil structures of varying sizes. This allowed it to autofocus and switch between modes like thermal imaging and night vision. The projectile's speed upon launch was incredibly high, making it impossible for standard imaging systems to capture its trajectory. However, Luo Wen had added a type of light-bending coating to the spore capsule, derived from the mantis shrimp's 20-color imaging system. This allowed the eagle eye bug to quickly detect the light distortion and lock onto the target. The bug's powerful dynamic vision system then kicked in, presenting a clear image of the projectile's flight path. Since Luo Wen and his subordinates shared the eagle eye bug's vision, they could observe the entire process in real time. Moreover, the eagle eye bugs were numerous, and Luo Wen had temporarily granted his subordinates the ability to switch camera angles freely. Failure is the mother of success. Failure isn't scary as long as we can learn from it and make improvements. Success will eventually come. Luo Wen watched the observation screen intently, casually replying to Morgan's question. "The Overlord speaks wisely," Morgan responded. The countdown ended, and the hyperbolic system activated. The spore capsule inside the orbital sling instantly vanished. The immense recoil reduced most of the orbital sling's structure to ash and even tore up a large section of the fungal carpet anchoring it to the ground. A few seconds later, the fungal carpet slammed back down, sending up clouds of dust through its torn seams. Multiple horrifying gashes appeared across its surface. Luo Wen didn't have time to worry about the damage to the fungal carpet. Unlike typical living organisms, the fungal carpet's injuries, while appearing severe, were minor as long as its main body wasn't massively burned or obliterated. These surface tears, though terrifying, were essentially superficial wounds that could heal in minutes. The first target for the orbital sling wasn't a distant planet but the Red Moon, a fellow satellite of the Genesis planet. After some calculations by the rat folk, today was the day when the Yellow Moon and Red Moon crossed paths, reducing their distance to under 200,000 kilometers. In space terms, this was practically point-blank range. 2 or 3 seconds after the projectile disappeared, the eagle eye bug reacquired the target. By then, the projectile had already covered half the distance. A minute later, it impacted the Red Moon's surface. The entire moon seemed to tremble slightly as the impact site formed a deep crater, throwing up massive amounts of dust. The impact point was tens of thousands of kilometers off the intended target. But at least it successfully landed on the Red Moon. Damn, Luo Wen couldn't help but mutter in astonishment. He wasn't surprised by the off-target distance or even the fact that it hit. What shocked him was how little time the flight had taken. While he already knew the hyperbolic system was powerful, he hadn't expected it to be this potent. Covering 200,000 kilometers in just over a minute meant the projectile had reached 1% of light speed. Did that mean it could reach a nearby star system in just a few centuries? Well, this made it clear. Further improvements to the orbital sling's performance were necessary. Although Luo Wen's perception of time was becoming increasingly vague, even he thought centuries were too long. These thoughts quickly passed as Luo Wen connected to the spore capsule on the Red Moon via the swarm network. The spore capsule, no response. Brood queen eggs, no response. Worker drone eggs, no response. Even the fungal carpet, no response. After repeated attempts, Luo Wen concluded that the excessive speed had caused too strong an impact, destroying the spore capsule and all the insect eggs inside. Was this experiment a success? There was no time to ponder. With the 2 moons still close, Luo Wen hurriedly prepared for a second launch. Fortunately, 3 orbital slings had been prepared. 1 was destroyed, but 2 remained operational. Although the previous sling's destruction had slightly tilted the remaining 2, concentrated resources had allowed one of them to be repaired. Under the assistance of burrower ants and worker drones, its base was straightened and repositioned. Without wasting time, the second projectile was loaded. With experience from the first attempt, the rat folk researchers adjusted their settings before the countdown for the second launch began. This time, Luo Wen learned from the previous mishap and capped the sling's performance. When the countdown ended, the projectile vanished. With the reduced performance, the orbital sling wasn't destroyed, nor did it tear up large portions of the fungal carpet. It sustained only minor damage. Given its significant plant cell composition, it could be easily repaired with the fungal carpet's help, making it reusable after simple maintenance. Chapter 164, Red Moon Base. This time, the flight duration was significantly longer. The spore capsule projectile flew for over 2 hours before kicking up a spray of lunar dust upon impact on the Red Moon's surface. However, due to the restricted performance of the orbital sling, which made it easier to control, the accuracy greatly improved. The impact site was only about 100 kilometers off the calculated landing point. Learning from the previous crash test data, the spore capsule's main structure was redesigned using the skeletal framework of deep-sea creatures combined with the hammer-like appendages of the mantis shrimp. Coupled with its inherent plant cell composition, its resistance to pressure and impact was vastly superior to Luo Wen's original designs. Additionally, the impact this time was relatively mild. Although the lichen-like outer structure of the spore capsule was severely damaged, the main body of the capsule remained largely intact. Luo Wen easily established a connection with the capsule via the swarm network and remotely activated it. Within the crater created by the impact, the side of the spore capsule facing the ground cracked open, releasing fungal carpet seeds along with some nutrients. The crack then sealed, shielding the fungal carpet seeds from the sparse but harmful cosmic radiation penetrating the moon's surface. Once the fungal carpet seeds landed, they activated immediately, consuming the surrounding nutrients at a frenzied pace. As the nutrients dwindled, a streak of purple-gray began to emerge. The roots of the fungal carpet rapidly developed, burrowing into the ground in search of frozen water and mineral resources. Soon, a magnetic field generator was formed, creating a small field that enveloped the crater. Having completed its temporary shielding role, the spore capsule was absorbed into the fungal carpet through an opening. Over a brief development period, the purple-gray fungal carpet fully enveloped the crater. Its roots burrowed dozens of meters underground, eventually uncovering a small water source. With access to water, the fungal carpet's growth accelerated. The main body of the carpet filled the crater entirely, while some of its branching structures fused with lunar dust to seal the crater's entrance completely. This precaution was implemented by Luo Wen as a potential defense mechanism for future spore capsule deployments on inhabited planets. While it seemed premature, Luo Wen programmed this camouflage as part of the system. The crater, now camouflaged by the fungal carpet, was no longer easily noticeable. Without deliberate investigation, it was easy to overlook. Inside the sealed, dark crater, a soft purple glow began to emanate. This was the newly adjusted lighting system, designed with a monochromatic scheme. The combination of the purple-gray fungal carpet and the gentle purple glow created a luxurious and mysterious atmosphere, finally eliminating the garishness reminiscent of a karaoke bar. As time passed and energy accumulated, some underground roots of the fungal carpet began to converge and press outward, displacing surrounding lunar soil to form a hollow cage-like structure. The fungal carpet wriggled briefly and deposited the spore capsule into the hollow structure. The spore capsule split open, revealing insect eggs of the brood queen and worker drones within. Some of the fungal carpet's main body extended through the gaps in the cage to supply nutrients to the eggs. At this point, the spore capsule's task was complete. On the Red Moon, the swarm now had the foundation of a base. What followed was a period of patient waiting. The consciousnesses of the rat folk on the Yellow Moon had been sent back to the Genesis planet by Luo Wen to analyze their data. Their space-adapted bodies were stored within the fungal carpet for maintenance. 10 days later, the worker drones emerged from their cocoons. With their assistance, the underground base's expansion accelerated. However, since worker drones weren't specialized for excavation, their efficiency was limited. Luo Wen considered including some burrower ant eggs in the next spore capsule. 30 days later, the brood queen's egg had grown to 5 or 6 meters tall and was ready to hatch. Luo Wen, however, let it remain in the egg for a few more days until it grew to 8 meters before allowing it to emerge. A larger size indicated stronger hatching capabilities. While the brood queen could continue to grow post-hatching, most of its energy would then be directed toward hatching, slowing its growth. The arrival of the brood queen finally provided the base with a cornerstone production unit, making its structural ecosystem complete. The first batch of burrower ant eggs was hatched in large numbers. Since the base was situated on the side of the red moon facing the Genesis planet, its main development would remain underground, necessitating a substantial number of specialized digging ants. Later, during the second conjunction of the two moons, Luo Wen used the orbital sling to send several more spore capsules to the red moon. Upon landing, these capsules were retrieved by swarm units and transported to the far side of the red moon. Finally, during the third conjunction, Luo Wen launched a large spore capsule containing a brood nest. Since the red moon orbited farther from the Genesis planet, its weaker gravitational pull made it a more suitable location for spore capsule launches. Following the gasification of his original body during a natural disaster, Luo Wen's new body had remained a compact 30 centimeters tall due to its lack of manual labor requirements. Subsequent adaptability experiments in the Starlight Enterprises laboratory had led to several additional losses of his body. As a result, his current form was under 30 centimeters in size. The yellow moon brood nest, produced based on Luo Wen's current body size, was similarly scaled at around 30 centimeters, only slightly larger than a brood queen egg. Thanks to numerous experiments conducted between the two moons, the swarm's slow projection technology had reached a highly refined level. Thus, transporting the brood nest, encased in amber-like material, to the red moon via a spore capsule was considered a safe process. Given that only a brood nest could produce brood queen eggs, the red moon, as the swarm's primary launch base, required a brood nest to anchor its operations. Otherwise, relying on imports from the yellow moon would be too cumbersome. With the brood nest in place, the swarm's development on the red moon quickly outpaced that on the yellow moon. On the far side of the red moon, numerous orbital slings were constructed. However, the name orbital sling was met with strong objections from Morgan and other intelligences. They argued that such an important space launch tool deserved a more imposing name. After some discussion, Luo Wen agreed. The name orbital sling was indeed a bit plain and unworthy of the grandeur of a space delivery system. Hence, after much deliberation, it was renamed the Swarm Meteor Launcher, or simply Launcher. Luo Wen didn't feel the new name was much more dignified than the old one but couldn't think of a better alternative, so he accepted it for the time being. The spore capsules were also renamed Swarm Meteors due to their lichen-clad structure, which made them resemble small meteors. Without closer inspection, their true nature would remain undiscovered. With numerous launches between the two moons, the swarm's mastery of slow projection technology reached maturity. Thus, the next phase of the swarm's plans began implementation. Chapter 165, The Observation Center. When Morgan first created the deity faith sect, its doctrines were remarkably lax. Beyond a requirement for secrecy, there were virtually no binding commandments. It simply preached that those who, in life, believed in, revered, and drew close to the divine might find the kingdom of God after death and gain rebirth there. Initially, many rat folk dismissed this as a hoax. However, over the years, more and more rat folk who had supposedly died returned to society with new bodies. These bodies often looked similar to their original forms but appeared significantly younger. Moreover, these individuals displayed no abnormalities. Their thoughts were coherent, their values aligned with their pre-death selves, and they remained dedicated to their former professions, showing no signs of mind control or brainwashing. As a result, what once required Morgan's considerable effort to promote turned into something rat folk fervently pursued. The deity faith sect became an open secret in certain circles. Over time, people from various walks of life, including many royals and nobles, sought ways to join. However, only those with scientific, managerial, or military command experience had a realistic chance of reaching the divine realm. This dynamic significantly reduced the prevalence of idle aristocrats among the rat folk. Many who had access to inside information pursued specialized careers, hoping to increase their chances of finding the kingdom of God after death, and perhaps achieving immortality. Even Empress Kerrigan, despite having injected the affinity serum in her youth, took a keen interest in military command in her spare time. She often engaged in simulated battle games with military staff outside her administrative duties. While the deity faith sect consistently maintained a low profile, as time passed, the number of deceased rat folk who returned grew steadily. These individuals often held positions of power before their deaths: teachers, superiors, royals, nobles, or leaders of influential families. Having been integrated into the swarm network, these returning rat folk subtly extended the influence of the deity faith sect across every facet of society. Although some insightful rat folk raised alarms and issued warnings, they lacked the power to change the tide. The returning individuals behaved obediently because Luo Wen needed a stable rat folk civilization to cultivate new talent for his purposes. However, should Luo Wen ever issue questionable orders, these individuals would carry them out without hesitation. The concerns of the insightful few were thus well-founded, yet the overall trend left them powerless to resist, often leading to their reluctant acceptance. Since its inception, an unknown factor seemed to have guided rat folk civilization toward a distinct preference for scientific research. Entertainment and leisure activities were sparse, and young rat folk aspired to careers in science, with researchers forming a substantial portion of the population. Years earlier, Empress Kerrigan had embraced Morgan's proposal to reduce funding for rocket-related technology and prioritize other underdeveloped fields. The Empire's reallocation of resources led many rat folk students to focus on previously neglected areas of science. Over the years, this shift produced a new wave of outstanding researchers and numerous breakthroughs. Under Luo Wen's direction, the rat folk's vast power structure began implementing various policies and measures in secret. Computing and radar-related technologies were prioritized, resulting in rapid advancements. However, astronomical research remained tightly controlled by swarm-affiliated insiders. Letting outsiders witness the frequent ball-tossing experiments between the two moons could incite widespread panic. The rat folk's latest refracting telescope technology offered superior image quality and a broader field of view compared to reflecting telescopes. However, large refracting telescopes required extensive industrial capabilities to construct. The immense size and weight of their lenses made them difficult to operate. Luo Wen had no such constraints. No longer limited to passively using foreign gene fragments, he developed a new observational bug species through cellular reconfiguration. Unlike the eagle-eye bug, this new bug, designed for large-scale refracting telescope purposes, was massive in size. Resembling a giant toad, it stood 30 meters tall. Its head was replaced by an enormous cylindrical telescope made of biological lenses crafted from crystalline cells, transparent scales, cartilage, and other materials. The creature's other organs were concentrated in its chest and abdomen. It lacked a mouth, relying on a connection to the fungal carpet for sustenance. Its limbs were extraordinarily thick, containing a high proportion of plant cells to support its massive body. Additionally, it was equipped with an anti-gravity magnetic module at its base. Even with these adaptations, the bug could only function on the moon's surface. The significantly stronger gravity of the Genesis planet would crush it instantly. This non-combative, purely auxiliary bug's sole purpose was to observe celestial bodies in real time and provide alerts for unidentified objects or phenomena. Due to its appearance, Luo Wen named it the giant eye bug. The swarm gradually produced over a dozen giant eye bugs for deployment across the two moons. To ensure timely reception of their observations, Luo Wen assigned a blade to coordinate with them. Simultaneously, he established an observation center on the moon. Over the years, as more intelligent rat folk were assimilated into the swarm network, not all chose to return to rat folk society. Many, devoted to research, remained within the swarm's secret laboratories, which hosted a growing number of insiders. In certain scientific fields where progress was slow due to a lack of personnel, Luo Wen forcibly reassigned these insiders to critical projects. For instance, in the Red Moon's Observation Center, Luo Wen mandated that over 80% of insiders in relevant fields work there. To accommodate those needing legitimate identities within rat folk society, Luo Wen devised a unique clock-in system. On the Genesis planet, these individuals were officially employed by swarm-affiliated laboratories. Each workday, they would report to a designated location and lie in prepared fungal carpet chambers. With a whoosh, their consciousnesses would transfer to their space-adapted bodies at the Lunar Observation Center. At the end of their shifts, they would return the same way. However, the proportion of rat folk choosing this arrangement steadily decreased. Only recently deceased individuals harbored lingering attachment to their previous lives. Over time, even these attachments faded entirely. Chapter 166, The Swarm Meteors. The star system containing the Genesis planet was named the Genesis system by Luo Wen. Long-term observations from the Lunar Observation Center revealed that the Genesis system comprised 11 planets. Luo Wen named them sequentially from the star outward as A1, A2, A3, A11, with A5 being the Genesis planet. Of these planets, A1 to A3 had no moons, A4 had 2, A5, the Genesis planet, also had 2, A6 had 3, A7 had 36, A8 had 5, and A9 had 4. The presence of moons around A10 and A11 remained uncertain due to their extreme orbital distances. To better organize these celestial bodies, Luo Wen devised a new naming system. The moons of the A-series planets were given grouped identifiers. For example, A5b1 referred to the yellow moon, and A5b2 refers to the red moon. The A with a number indicated the parent planet, while B and its subsequent number represented the moon's designation, ranked from closest to farthest. Over the years, the swarm had honed its expertise in slow projectile launches through its ball-tossing experiments between the two moons. Combined with rapid advancements in computing and trajectory calculation technologies thanks to the rat folk, the accuracy of the launchers significantly improved. Now, spore capsules launched between the moons could land within a kilometer of the target location. With technical proficiency secured, the swarm was ready to implement the next phase of its plan. This second phase was ambitious: to colonize the entire Genesis system. The first step involved launching spore capsules toward the planets and their moons to establish subsidiary bases. While the varied environments of these celestial bodies presented challenges, long-term observations indicated no signs of existing civilizations within the system. This eliminated the primary risk. Environmental factors would be addressed by the swarm's magnetic field protection systems, with extreme cases managed as they arose. Although described as slow, the spore capsules still achieved a velocity of 30 km per second, a speed roughly 10,000th of the speed of light, several times faster than the rat folk's rockets. Achieving a successful launch, however, required extensive calculations. For instance, the nearest planet to the Genesis planet, A4, was about 60 million kilometers away at its closest approach and over 400 million kilometers at its farthest. During the latter, the star would obstruct the path, making a launch impossible. The optimal launch window, therefore, was during the closest approach, when the spore capsule, traveling at 30 kilometers per second, would take about 23 days to reach A4. However, both planets orbited the star at high speeds. Accurate targeting required accounting for lead angles, gravitational influences from various celestial bodies, planetary rotation and revolution, and even the star's motion. Luo Wen alone couldn't handle these calculations, but with a team of 15,000 rat folk researchers. The benefits of cultivating rat folk civilization became evident. A4, the closest planet to the swarm, was just the beginning. The system's outermost planet, A11, required over 300 years to complete one orbit around the star and came no closer than 8 billion kilometers to the Genesis planet. A spore capsule would take roughly 10 years to reach it. The complexity of lead angle calculations over such distances was staggering, requiring consideration of multiple planetary orbits. Given these challenges, colonizing A11 would rely heavily on luck, so Luo Wen decided to focus on closer targets first. Luo Wen also opted to temporarily forego A1 to A3, as their proximity to the star made their environments extremely hostile, posing significant colonization challenges with minimal reward. Over more than a decade, the swarm launched spore capsules to planets A4 through A8 and their moons. The extended timeline was partly due to missing the closest approach to A8 when the plan was first formulated, forcing the swarm to wait 10 years for the next alignment, measured in billions of kilometers of separation. Meanwhile, the swarm successfully landed and expanded on A4 and A6. A4, being closer to the star than the Genesis planet, had higher temperatures, lacked an atmosphere, and was subjected to intense radiation. Surface temperatures reached over 200 degrees Celsius. Despite these harsh conditions, the swarm adapted by utilizing genes from deep-sea organisms found near undersea volcanoes. Such temperatures were trivial by comparison. However, A4's limited water resources restricted the growth of the fungal carpet, slowing the base's development. In contrast, A6, located farther from the star, was coated in frost and had abundant water resources. Despite temperatures dropping to nearly -100 degrees Celsius, Luo Wen's experiments with enhanced glycerol secretion systems allowed swarm organisms to function normally. Magnetic field generators further stabilized their internal temperatures, rendering the cold a non-issue. With plentiful water, the fungal carpet spread rapidly, supporting a thriving swarm base. Observations indicated that A7 was a gas giant, the largest planet in the system, nearly 1,500 times the size of the Genesis planet. It boasted 36 moons. Even at its closest, A7 was about 1.5 billion kilometers from the Genesis planet. 2 years earlier, the swarm capitalized on this proximity, launching over 100 spore capsules toward A7 within a year. Factoring in other influences, the capsules traveled over 2 billion kilometers. They were now approaching A7 and its moons, with their arrival expected in a few days. Luo Wen eagerly anticipated this milestone, marveling at how, in the vastness of space, the Genesis planet and A7 could still be considered neighbors. Yet even a neighborly visit required travel times measured in years. Thankfully, Luo Wen no longer perceived time as a constraint. For the rat folk, however, a trip to a distant neighbor might take so long they'd perish of old age before arriving. Chapter 167. Sarah. 1. Over the years, Luo Wen not only delivered gifts to his neighbors within the Genesis solar system but also undertook other endeavors. On the far side of the Red Moon stood dozens of massive launchers. These devices were much larger than standard models, reaching a staggering height of 40 to 50 meters. These oversized launchers possessed significantly enhanced launching capabilities. Once activated, they could accelerate projectiles to speeds of 20,000 to 30,000 kilometers per second, with a maximum speed reaching 1/10 of the speed of light. Of course, their accuracy was correspondingly poor. Even attempting to lob objects between the yellow moon and the red moon would yield unpredictable results. However, Luo Wen dared not attempt using these giant launchers between the two moons. After all, velocity equaled mass, and he had no idea to what extent the spore capsule's mass might increase at 1/10 the speed of light. Luo Wen figured that neither the yellow moon nor the red moon would appreciate being struck by such a projectile. In truth, these giant launchers were not intended for use within the solar system. They had missions befitting their names. They were true swarm meteor launchers. Their projectiles were also enlarged versions of spore capsules, approximately 10 meters long, 3 to 4 meters high, and about 5 meters wide. The projectile was encased in a thick layer of meteoric material. Inside, besides containing nutrients, queen ants, worker drones, and burrower ant eggs, the spore capsule itself was tasked with far more. Although technically a byproduct of the fungal carpet, this type of spore capsule resembled a living organism. Its body was equipped with multiple eyes, not quite to the extent of the giant eye bug, but reaching the level of the eagle eye bug. These exceptional visual abilities allowed the capsules to observe their surroundings through deliberately left openings in their meteoric exteriors. Furthermore, they were equipped with a more advanced propulsion system. Luo Wen didn't intend to use them merely as projectiles. At such high acceleration speeds, without proper safety mechanisms, the capsules would inevitably crash and be destroyed. These swarm meteors were entrusted with exploration missions beyond the Genesis solar system. Their accuracy was irrelevant. What mattered was simply launching them outward and hoping for the best. With good fortune, they might enter other solar systems, getting captured by the gravity of stars or planets, and then find a way to land. With average luck, they could encounter a comet or the like and hitch a ride. And if unlucky, they would drift through space until their energy was depleted, becoming actual meteors. Their propulsion systems were primarily used to alter trajectories. During flight, the capsules would periodically make slight course adjustments. Luo Wen was uncertain whether advanced civilizations existed in the neighboring solar systems. If a swarm meteor happened to crash into an inhabited planet and damaged flora or property, it could lead to someone tracing the trajectory back to him, which would be quite awkward. As a master of strategizing against the unknown, Luo Wen naturally considered such scenarios. Over the past decade, the swarm had launched over 1,000 such swarm meteors into the cosmic void. Most of the resources extracted from the two moons were dedicated to producing these giant launchers and swarm meteors. Luo Wen even assigned a special team of blades, granting them authority to monitor the trajectories of these meteors in shifts around the clock. However, it seemed unlikely that any feedback would be received in the short term. Based on calculations, the nearest solar system to the Genesis solar system was over 5 light-years away. Even if the swarm meteors reached their maximum speed, it would still take decades, or even centuries, for them to make the journey. Nevertheless, this nearest solar system received special attention from Luo Wen. More than half of the launched swarm meteors were directed toward it. Teacher, am I going to die? In the opulent royal palace of the Ratfolk Empire, a lavishly decorated bedroom housed a massive, dark wooden bed. The bed was crafted from fine materials, intricately carved, and emitted a faint, soothing fragrance. The bedroom doors and windows were tightly shut. All servants had been dismissed, leaving only the young Morgan seated by the bedside, gazing at the frail and aged Empress Sarah Kerrigan lying upon it. Judging by your appearance, it seems that's the case. Over the decades, Morgan had watched the Empress from birth to her final days. Their bond had grown exceptionally close. Now, with no outsiders present, their conversation was not one of sovereign and subject, nor superior and subordinate, but that of teacher and student, allowing for a level of informality and even teasing. Teacher, do you think I will find the divine kingdom after I die? She asked. That shouldn't be a problem. You have experience managing an empire and are adept at strategy games. Our God would likely need someone like you, Morgan replied. Teacher, there's no need to emphasize the games. Haha, my mistake, Morgan chuckled. The Empress sighed in exasperation at such a flippant response, barely convincing for even a child. Knowing Morgan well, she understood he was merely trying to lighten the mood. Teacher, I'm on the verge of death. Can you take this seriously? All right, honestly, there's not much to it, Sarah. Just close your eyes, and before you know it, you'll awaken again. It'll be quicker than a nap. Perhaps because he understood that entering the swarm network posed little actual risk. Morgan didn't feel much of the sorrow typically associated with parting. Yes, I know. As I've aged, seeing you has only deepened my envy. Who wouldn't want to be young again? In truth, I've been looking forward to this day for a long time, Sarah said softly. Her eyes, now clouded and lifeless, stared blankly at the ceiling as she murmured to herself, ever since you reappeared in my life, teacher, I've been pondering, what kind of being is the god? Did he truly create the Ratfolk? If so, why? Does he seek faith? Has he returned to the moon? You'll soon have the answers, Sarah, Morgan reassured. But the Empress, now on the brink of death, seemed not to hear him. She continued murmuring, over the years, I've witnessed the Empire's changes. I've seen what you've done. To be honest, I have some regrets. Your covert influence has already rendered the royal family powerless. But even if I had disagreed, what could I have done? The American kingdom's sudden and mysterious downfall was a stark reminder. Had I refused, would I have inexplicably died in the palace the next day? Morgan remained silent. In the end, God is too enigmatic and too powerful. We have no means of resistance. We can only hope he is benevolent and treats the Ratfolk kindly. After all, I am their Empress, Sarah whispered. Rest assured, Sarah, God's ambitions are not confined to this small planet. Otherwise, there wouldn't even be Ratfolk, Morgan said softly, as if lost in thought. Hearing this, the Empress's wrinkled lips curved into a faint smile. And she fell silent. After a long pause, Morgan stood and murmured, My student, your skill in emotional manipulation has surpassed even mine. Just now, I almost shed tears. Chapter 168, Sarah, 2. Teacher, is this the divine kingdom? Sarah asked Morgan as they stood within the swarm network. Over the years, the swarm network had undergone several updates. The most notable improvement was the ability for intelligent beings within the network to manifest physical forms, rather than appearing as mere glowing orbs. As the deity faith sect grew increasingly powerful and more Ratfolk discovered the door to the network, Luo Wen could no longer personally oversee every individual entering it. He didn't want to end up playing the role of a doorman. To address this, Luo Wen assigned a team of blades to handle the Ratfolk intelligent entities entering the swarm network. To distinguish them from the combat commanding blades, he renamed this group Lookouts. Luo Wen established a set of rules for the Lookouts to evaluate each intelligent entity knocking on the door. Those who met the criteria were granted access to the network. However, since the Lookouts' rigid thinking and inflexible methods could miss certain exceptional talents, Luo Wen also appointed a secondary review team composed of intelligent entities to ensure no valuable souls were overlooked. As the former empress of the Kerrigan Empire, Sarah possessed extraordinary talent and had been injected with affinity serum. She easily found the door and, with her abilities, effortlessly met the entry standards. Gaining access to the Swarm Network. Morgan, as the first Ratfolk intelligent entity to enter the Swarm Network, had served as a steward for Luo Wen over the years, completing numerous tasks. His network privileges had been upgraded multiple times, granting him the ability to freely traverse between the Swarm Network and physical space. Thus, the seemingly final farewell between teacher and student lasted less than 2 minutes. The two reunited within the Swarm Network. Sarah's exceptional talent was evident. When Morgan had first entered the network, he had been unconscious for a long time, only waking up after Luo Wen had implanted his consciousness into an insect body. As the first Ratfolk to enter the network, Morgan was no slouch in terms of aptitude. Yet Sarah not only maintained consciousness upon entry but was able to casually chat with Morgan as if nothing had happened. Morgan felt a mix of awe and resignation. Had he possessed such prowess, his initial experience wouldn't have been so nerve-wracking. Yes, you can also call it the Swarm Network. We're all part of it now, Morgan explained. Amazing, Sarah remarked as she tested her youthful virtual body. It's even more remarkable than I imagined. I've been looking forward to this for decades. Morgan shrugged. Wait here a moment. I'll make arrangements for your affairs. Meanwhile, here's some information for you to review. There are decisions you'll need to make soon. That's a rather awkward way to put it, Sarah muttered as she accepted the data packet. Despite her protest, she began reading. Morgan, meanwhile, disconnected from the network and returned to his body in the Kerrigan Empire's palace. An hour later, Morgan re-entered the network and appeared beside Sarah. Sarah, everything has been arranged. Your funeral will be exceptionally grand. Of course, it was planned by me personally. But please, don't overdo it. I was merely trying to lift your spirits. After all, you've only just died, it must be quite distressing. Thank you. I'd be even happier if you would stop talking, Sarah replied with a graceful bow. Morgan shrugged, ending their first round of banter within the Swarm Network. His expression turned serious. Sarah, you should now have a general understanding of the situation. What is your decision? Sarah appeared to have made up her mind. Without hesitation, she replied, I won't return to the Empire to make trouble for my nephew, who's waited so long for me to pass. He was quite adorable as a child. I've dedicated my life to the Ratfolk. Now that I have a new identity, I'll contribute to my new kin. Well said, Sarah. Perhaps it's time for you to meet the Overlord, the being you've long considered your god. It would be an honor, teacher. Although the Overlord can reach us instantly within the Swarm Network, it's only fitting for us to meet in person given our status, Morgan explained. Guiding Sarah through the Swarm Network, Morgan led her to the Red Moon base. There, within one of the spore capsules, lay a body prepared for Sarah. With Morgan's assistance, Sarah entered a spore capsule containing a well-equipped female ratfolk body with white fur. When the capsule opened, Sarah stood up. She gazed at her body in a daze, gently stroking her fur. Although she had experienced a youthful form within the Swarm Network, the physical sensation of this body was far more impactful. She opened her mouth but made no sound. Remembering Morgan's earlier explanation that the lunar surface lacked air, Sarah recalled the method of telepathic communication he had taught her, a unique form of interaction among swarm nodes. With her exceptional talent, Sarah quickly mastered telepathic dialogue. Linking to Morgan, she said, as incredible as it may sound, I must repeat how amazing this all is. Does this mean I've truly come back to life? Of course. This is the Overlord's immense power. Consciousness is your true self, the body is merely clothing. Your current body, for instance, is specially designed for space. It may look like a ratfolk on the outside. But its internal structure is entirely different, Morgan explained, pointing to her body's protective magnetic field. He added, think of it this way, when clothing is damaged, it can always be replaced. As long as consciousness remains intact, we can achieve immortality. What an awe-inspiring ability, Sarah said with admiration. No wonder the deity faith sect is unstoppable. The allure of immortality alone is enough to drive many to abandon everything in pursuit of it. You'll grow accustomed to it. Sarah, the swarm's potential far exceeds your imagination. So, teacher, are we going to meet the god now? Does he have any taboos I should know about? Sarah inquired earnestly. After a moment's thought, Morgan replied, don't call him a god. Address him as Overlord instead. And whatever you do, never refer to him as Queen. That will incur punishment. Why? Sarah asked, curious. The Overlord is the source of the swarm and, by our understanding, suited to maternal titles. But for some reason, he strongly rejects such names, Morgan explained. What would happen if I called him that? Sarah pressed. Oh, Morgan drawled. You might want to try it out. Perhaps you'll develop an appreciation for the cute little green bugs and their secretions. Thanks for the warning. I'm officially not interested, Sarah said, shaking her head. She wasn't about to fall for such an obvious trap. After chatting for a while, the two exited the spore capsule chamber and walked through a passageway. In a massive chamber, they met Luo Wen. This time, Luo Wen was using a temporary insect body, as his original body was stored away with no pressing research tasks requiring its use. Luo Wen had little impression of the ratfolk's first empress. Most negotiations and subsequent dealings had been handled by Morgan. Knowing she was an unmarried old monarch, Luo Wen speculated that such individuals tended to be temperamental. To avoid unnecessary trouble, he decided to adopt a slightly more imposing demeanor for their meeting. Chapter 169, A7. Thus, this meeting ended quickly under an atmosphere of solemnity. Both sides merely introduced themselves, with Sarah making herself known to Luo Wen. Teacher, the Overlord is truly awe-inspiring. Compared to him, I, as the former empress of the ratfolk, am far inferior, Sarah remarked. Morgan appeared puzzled as he replied, I'm not sure what's going on with the Overlord today. He's usually much more approachable. But there's plenty of time in the future, once you get to know him better. You'll understand. Sarah chose not to pursue the topic. Teacher, what's next? Since you don't plan to return, why not focus on a career within the swarm? Right now, we have plenty of personnel in management, but we're severely lacking in military commanders. Perhaps you could give that a try, Morgan suggested after some thought. But I only have experience in games, Sarah replied. Since the unification of the ratfolk, and under the deterrence of unexpected events, no skirmishes involving more than 100 individuals had occurred for years. Even if Sarah had wanted to hone her skills, she couldn't find the opportunity and had to resort to practicing through games. It doesn't matter. The swarm's combat strategies are entirely different from those of the ratfolk. Besides, the swarm currently has no enemies, so there's plenty of time to learn. As long as you're interested, it won't be an issue. After considering for a moment, Sarah said, I'll take your suggestion, teacher. In her younger days as the eldest daughter, she had led small-scale skirmishes against the Kingdom of American. She had enjoyed those days of commanding far more than her time as empress, though the later years of peace had left her with no opportunities to shine. The two chatted as they walked. Due to the weak gravity of the moon, every step they took sent them soaring a considerable distance. Before long, they exited the underground base and arrived on the red moon's surface. Looking at the vast expanse of purple-gray fungal carpet and the towering launchers scattered across the landscape, Sarah remarked wryly. The Empire's observatories must have been completely taken over by the swarm. Otherwise, how could I, as the Empress, have been unaware that the moon had transformed into this? This is the far side of the moon, invisible from the Genesis planet. Moreover, the Empire's observatories are indeed under the swarm's control. Don't dwell on it, Sarah. It's for the ratfolk's protection, Morgan said seriously. You're probably right, teacher, Sarah said after some thought, quickly grasping the underlying logic. The ratfolk's safety depended on their harmlessness. If they stumbled upon something that caused unrest, given the disparity in strength between the two sides, it would be the ratfolk who suffered in the end. Soon, she adjusted her mindset. After all, she was already dead, so there was no point in worrying about such things. Shifting focus, she asked curiously, Teacher, what are those giant structures? She had already asked about the purple-gray fungal carpet back in the spore capsule room. Now, her interest was piqued by the massive launchers rising from it. Those are our swarm meteor launchers. The smaller ones handle precise launches within the solar system, while the larger ones are used for random launches toward other star systems. We have a batch of meteors nearing contact with planet A7. Perhaps that's why the Overlord is so serious today. Another planet is about to reveal its secrets to the swarm, which is always an exciting prospect. Indeed, Luo Wen was closely monitoring developments concerning planet A7. Over the coming days, 31 spore capsules would make contact with the planetary system. To oversee the operation, Luo Wen had deployed 300 blades and over 100 intelligent entities, dividing them into 31 teams to manage the capsule's landings one by one. This was only the vanguard. Due to A7's immense size and its numerous satellites with varying orbital speeds, capsules could only land when the satellites rotated to face the Genesis planet. Launching the capsules had taken nearly a year. Likewise, over the year following the Vanguard's arrival, an additional 81 capsules would gradually reach A7's satellites. Of the 31 capsules in this batch, 15 were directed at A7's primary planet, while the remainder targeted its satellites. Depending on satellite size, 2 capsules each were assigned to A7B3, A7B9, A7B15, A7B23, and A7B25. The larger satellites, A7B7 and A7B21, were allocated 3 capsules each. 2 hours later, it was estimated that within just over an hour, the first 2 spore capsules would make contact with A7B25. Luo Wen and the team responsible for these capsules were on high alert. Although this was a slow-speed launch within the star system, the spore capsules still traveled at speeds of 30 km per second. With the swarm's current technological capabilities, no armor could guarantee the survival of the seeds and eggs inside upon collision with a planet at such velocity. Thus, deceleration procedures needed to begin an hour before contact. For hyperspeed random launches aimed at targets outside the system, deceleration had to start a year or 2 in advance. At speeds of 1/10 the speed of light, collisions would obliterate the capsules regardless of the target's condition. One must remember that the asteroid that struck the Genesis planet and caused mass extinction, and vaporized Luo Wen's original body, had a speed of only 19.5 km per second, far slower than even the slow swarm launches. Yet its impact was devastating. If the swarm could ensure accuracy and craft projectiles of unparalleled durability, it might one day create planet-penetrating weapons capable of obliterating smaller celestial bodies with a single shot, far surpassing the destructive power of nuclear weapons. However, while the swarm had mastered slow-speed hyperbolic launches, their maximum velocity remained at 30 km per second. Hyperspeed random launches reached 1/10 the speed of light, 30,000 km per second. The numerical difference alone was 1,000-fold, but the technological gap was exponentially greater. Each incremental speed increase required exponentially more effort. Consider the difficulty of increasing a bicycle speed from 5 km per hour to 50 km per hour versus increasing it from 50 km per hour to 500 km per hour. Both represent a tenfold increase, yet they are worlds apart. Moreover, developing materials capable of withstanding planetary penetration required unparalleled advancements in material science, rivaling the challenges of creating hyperspeed launch systems. Thus, for the foreseeable future, hyperbolic planetary annihilators remained a distant dream for Luo Wen. By the time such weapons were developed, the swarm might have grown to a scale where they were no longer necessary. Chapter 170, A7B25. From the perspective of the spore capsule, the enormous planet A7 loomed ahead, dominating the entire field of view. Its elliptical surface was layered with bands of various colors, resembling a multi-layered cake. A7's rotational speed was astonishing. Despite being over 1,000 times larger than the Genesis planet, it completed one rotation in less than half the time, causing the colored bands to visibly swirl as they moved. In the vastness of space surrounding the massive planet, several smaller, dimly lit spheres were faintly visible. One of these was growing steadily larger, the target of this spore capsule's journey, A7B25. Located in A7's outer orbital zone, A7B25 became the first celestial body in the A7 system to be visited by the swarm. Smaller than Yellow Moon, it was roughly 1/10 its size. Ordinarily, the swarm could conquer such a small satellite with a single spore capsule. However, for this mission, Luo Wen had decreed that every satellite, regardless of size, would receive at least 2 capsules for redundancy. Inside the spore capsule, the propulsion system activated. Unlike the older jet-based deceleration and steering mechanisms, the swarm had made significant technological advancements with the help of its growing number of intelligent entities. This capsule featured a new hydrogen propulsion system. Historically, spore capsules had been equipped with an external hydrogen balloon module. Morgan had even once used this feature to bluff Sarah into astonishment. The upgraded system consisted of 2 storage chambers and a reaction chamber. One storage chamber housed special algae cells capable of generating hydrogen, while the other connected to the capsule's internal ecological recycling system. During operation, the chloroplasts in the ecological system released large amounts of oxygen into one chamber. Simultaneously, the other chamber produced hydrogen. These gases were fed into the reaction chamber through specialized conduits. Where a chemical reaction occurred, the reaction chamber, lined with heat-resistant and insulating materials, withstood the intense heat generated without compromising the integrity of the capsule's other internal components. The energy from the reaction was expelled through propulsion nozzles, enabling the spore capsule to fly or adjust its trajectory. Additionally, the water produced as a byproduct of the reaction was recycled back into the ecological system, ensuring resource efficiency. Although the new propulsion system was more powerful than the older jet-based systems, it had its limitations. In space, its maximum velocity barely reached 3 kilometers per second, just enough to escape the moon's gravitational pull. This speed was far slower than Ratfolk rockets, leaving the system in an awkward position. For short-range space travel, the swarm's meteor launchers were far more efficient and reliable. For long-range journeys, despite its resource efficiency, the propulsion system's lack of perpetual motion meant it would deplete its energy long before leaving the Genesis solar system. Furthermore, with the Genesis planet's orbital speed at 30 kilometers per second, any such spaceship that left the planet's gravitational influence would be incapable of returning under its own power. Still, the system represented an alternate pathway. The swarm couldn't rely solely on ballistic launches forever, it needed conventional spacefaring technology. This propulsion system might just be the beginning of the swarm's journey toward functional spacecraft. A7's orbital positioning had delayed the launch of the swarm meteors until 2 years prior. Luo Wen assigned the hydrogen propulsion system as a deceleration mechanism for this mission, intending to evaluate its performance. To mitigate potential risks, a second spore capsule equipped with the traditional jet-based deceleration system was launched for each target. This redundancy was the primary reason for the minimum of 2 capsules per satellite. As the capsule approached A7B25, the lichen coating its exterior opened up pre-configured vents and observation holes. The forward vents began expelling energy, initiating deceleration. The docking team, comprising intelligent entities and blades, worked diligently. Given the vast distance between the Genesis planet and A7, numerous variables rendered the initial calculations less precise. The team constantly recalculated the capsule's trajectory based on live feed data and made minor adjustments using the side vents. As the capsule neared A7B25, its velocity gradually dropped to 5 km per second. Over the next 2 minutes, it would decelerate further to 2 km per second. Eventually colliding with the satellite at just 1 km per second, A7B25 was a frigid world. The frost covering its surface testified to its extreme cold. Situated even farther from the star than A6, it was unsurprising that A7B25 was essentially a frozen wasteland. The landing proceeded without incident. With the swarm's prior experience on planets like A4 and A6, the operation had become routine. Apart from the need to significantly reduce speed for ice-covered worlds, there were few special considerations. Upon impact, shards of ice and rock flew in all directions. The front half of the capsule's lichen structure was obliterated, but the interior remained intact. Moments later, the fungal carpet seeds were ejected and activated. Once they connected to the swarm network, the landing was declared a success. The seeds of a swarm base had been sown, ready to expand and grow. Not long after, the second spore capsule equipped with the jet-based deceleration system landed 200 kilometers away. Its fungal carpet seeds also successfully connected to the network. The intelligent entities in the docking team collectively sighed in relief, while the blades remained emotionless. In the following hours, spore capsules successfully landed on A7B3, A7B7, A7B9, A7B15, A7B21, and A7B23. Remarkably, several of these satellites had thin atmospheres, likely a result of A7's immense gravitational influence. However, the atmospheres were too sparse to hinder the landings. Even more astonishing were the abundant water resources discovered on the satellites. On A7b15, for instance, the fungal carpet's roots penetrated just 10 meters of rock before reaching vast reserves of liquid water. The presence of such water allowed the fungal carpet to proliferate rapidly, accelerating the establishment of swarm bases. With the satellites secured, the main event awaited: the landing of 15 spore capsules on A7 itself within the next hour. Luo Wen reassigned members from teams that had completed their tasks to reinforce the groups managing the capsules bound for A7. Landing on a gas giant of such size was uncharted territory for the swarm, and the operation would undoubtedly generate a wealth of data. Adequate manpower was essential to handle the unprecedented challenges ahead.